Hi everyone, this is What If Fan, bringing you another part of What If. Harry became an artificer. Please find fanfic name and author name in the description, and please support the author. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Let's start. Chapter 11, Summertime. Carefully, carefully, Harry muttered to himself as he worked the right lens of his glasses back into the frame. In the weeks since summer had started, he'd been eagerly awaiting the completion of his new smithy. According to the magical stonemason, it would be ready tomorrow morning, and Harry couldn't wait to get to work. Right now he was finishing a side project he'd considered back when he was working on his rune safe. There we are, just like new. Harry grinned as he held up his newly enchanted glasses. An engorgement charm had increased the size of his glasses enough that he could etch a runic array into the right arm of the frame. Canceling the charm had returned the glasses back to their original size, and he'd set to work putting the lens back into the frames properly. Now let's see if this worked. Harry smiled as he walked down into the living room of Wood End Cottage and saw Sirius reading the Daily Prophet. A tiny amount of mana sent into his glasses, and Harry grinned when a number appeared on the right lens. 4688 was a marked improvement from what Sirius had had when they'd first officially met at St. Mungo's. His godfather was obviously regaining the mana levels he'd had before his coma. The next good news was that his updated runic sequence worked. The original Scouter sequence had no ability beyond counting and displaying a numeric amount. With a small addition to the sequence, his glasses now showed the proper number, with a comma placed every 3 digits. This would make it a bit easier to glance at a reading and understand it as opposed to having to parse out any larger numbers. He'd stumbled over Flamel's number for a moment when he'd first read it, and not just from the shock of the old alchemist's ridiculously high reading. "Watch her all. I've come for a visit," Tonks announced loudly as she strolled through the front door without even knocking. Sirius had given her permission to do so after the first 2 times the metamorph had done it. Tonks had been over nearly every day, and Harry couldn't say he disliked it. "Hello, Dora. Here to tease Harry again?" Sirius chortled as he looked over his second cousin. "Yep," Tonks admitted shamelessly as she looked up at Harry at the top of the stairs. "Harry doesn't mind, right?" "I guess." Harry sighed playfully, making the bubbly teen grin brightly at him. A quick scan, and Harry chuckled, making the currently purple-haired girl tilt her head. "What's up, Harrikins?" Tonks asked as Sirius looked on an amused grin on his face. "Your mana increased again, Tonks," Harry stated, and Tonks looked confused. "Not that I'm not happy about that, but how did you know? You don't have your Scouter on you." Tonks questioned, and Harry's grin only grew more. "Oh, don't I?" Harry questioned as he tapped the right side of his glasses. "I think you'll find that I very much do." "You made your glasses into a Scouter?" Tonks inquired as he made his way down the stairs. Sirius looked surprised at the announcement and put down his paper. "Yeah, took a bit to figure out a safe way to do it, but my glasses are now the newest upgraded Scouter." Harry smiled and swiftly rolled his eyes, when both Tonks and Sirius gave a rather patronizing golf clap for his achievement. "Nerd!" Tonks and Sirius exclaimed in unison before turning on each other and shouting, "Jinx!" "Real mature, you two." Harry grimaced, and Tonks and Sirius both burst into laughter. "So have I increased again? I still maintain that I've got more mana than Mooney." Sirius looked eager, and Harry could only shake his head at his godfather's competitiveness. "You're at 4688 now, Sirius. That's much higher than when you were in St. Mungo's, but still not quite at Remus's level yet," Harry informed his godfather. "Just you wait. I just need a little more recovery time, and then I'm totally surpassing Mooney." Sirius nodded with his arms crossed over his chest. "You said my mana increased, but then you don't tell me what it is? That's mean, Harrikins." Tonks pouted at him, and Harry smiled before telling her, "You've gone up to 5876, Miss Soon-to-be Auror." Harry informed, and Tonks smiled happily, pleased with her increasing magical strength. "What are you at, Harrikins? You've been practicing since the last time you told us." Tonks wondered, and Harry was happy to inform his friend of what his test frame had said when he checked his mana level this morning. "I've increased a bit. I'm at 1182 as of this morning," Harry proclaimed. "Congratulations, Harrikins. You finally broke 4 digits." Tonks cheered as she pulled him into a hug. Sirius clapped on the couch, while Harry gently returned the hug. "So, what did you want to do today, Tonks?" Harry asked, and Sirius waved his hand widely like an overenthusiastic student. "The Battle Royale," Sirius declared, before tossing a spell at each of them from his previously hidden wand. Bright letters appeared over both of their heads. Above Harry's head, the words, "Nymphadora's Harry," appeared in bright multicolor. Conversely, above Tonks's head, in the same multicolored letters, appeared the words, "Harry's Nymphadora," and both of them turned a bit pink in the cheeks at reading the labels hovering over them. "Sirius, you're dead!" Tonks roared out at seeing her given name hovering in the air. The metamorph's hair had turned red to match her indignation as she hurled a stinging hex at the marauder. "You'll never take me, Auror!" Sirius cackled as he deflected the hex and dodged the cushion Harry had thrown at him. "Let's get him, Harry!" Tonks cried out as she threw another stinging hex at the laughing man. "Agreed." Harry nodded as he levitated more cushions to assail his godfather with. "You two are only proving my labels correct," Sirius chortled as he dodged the cushions and mad his way out of the sitting room while emitting bright spots of light from his wand. The next few hours would be spent acting like children, and Harry had to admit it felt good to just let loose and relax with his loved ones. The next morning, "This place is perfect!" Harry grinned as he looked around his new smithy. Sirius stood back with a large smile on his face, seeing Harry so happy. The young artificer was practically bouncing between the various areas of the new smithy, with sparkles in his eyes. "Let's get to work," Harry declared, and Sirius could only shake his head at his godson's gung-ho attitude when it came to enchanting. But it would be interesting to watch Harry work. So Sirius settled in while Harry started preparing to use his new smithy for the first time. "Well, at least I made sure the smithy was fully stocked with materials," Sirius mused to himself as he watched Harry working to shape a piece of iron into the shape of a knife. The repetitive strikes of the hammer rang throughout the smithy, and the hot metal slowly took on a vaguely knife-like shape. "Darn it!" Harry exclaimed, and Sirius started for a moment thinking his godson had hurt himself. "I messed it up," Harry complained as he used the metal tongs to hold up the now misshapen iron that had been much more knife-shaped a couple hammer strikes ago. "Can you fix it?" Sirius asked curiously. "I think so," Harry replied as he looked over his first attempt and then put it back into the flames of the forge. Sirius had to admit he was rather impressed by his godson's passion for enchanting. Most 11, soon-to-be 12-year-olds often gave up on a new thing if their first try failed. But Harry just learned from his attempt and tried again. It was a rather mature state that Harry demonstrated, and Sirius found it admirable. The two would spend the next several hours in the smithy that day. By the end of it, Harry had a proto-knife beaten out. Tomorrow would see if it could hold an edge when Harry tried to sharpen it. The third week of July. Harry had barely paid attention to his end-of-year exam results when they came in. He'd seen a few O's and some EEs, followed by an A in potions. It figured that his lowest grade would come from Snape. But Harry was busy making his 15th attempt at a knife that could hold the durability and ever-sharp enchantments, so he had other things to focus on. This one came out well, Harry mused as he looked over his newest knife. Maybe this one will be able to hold the enchantments. He hoped as he placed it on his work table to start etching runes. Etching out the runic array onto the blade wasn't difficult after doing it 15 times. "Now for the moment of truth," Harry stated as he prepared to test the durability enchantment. Swinging his blacksmith hammer down onto the newly enchanted knife, Harry grimaced as a crack appeared on the blade. "Bloody hell. Why won't they hold the enchantment? I must be doing something wrong, but what?" The young artificer mused as he looked over the damaged knife. "Harry, are you in here?" Penny called as she stuck her head inside the smithy. "Penny? Oh, is it that time already?" Harry questioned as he looked towards the clock near the doorway. Sure enough, it showed the time as 1:30 in the afternoon. Penny had asked to come over after lunch today, and Harry had gotten caught up in his work. "Any luck?" Penny asked as she looked over the table. "Not with the enchanting. My ability to make a knife has grown by leaps and bounds, though." Harry sighed as Penny gave him a smile and a reassuring one-armed hug. "You'll figure it out, Harry. Just give it some time," Penny assured him before gently guiding him towards the door of the smithy. "Take a break for a bit, and let's do something else. Oh yes, I wanted to tell you that my mana level has gone up again. I'm at 45 18th, according to the test frame you gave me. Way to make my improvement seem less impressive, Penny." Harry huffed playfully at her. "But a break sounds good." He agreed with the pretty blonde as he walked out of the smithy with her. "Taylor, would you clean the smithy, please?" he asked at the doorway, and a soft pop was heard. "Of course, young master. Taylor be doing it right away." Taylor, Woodend Cottage's new house elf, replied happily as she stood a few meters away. The female elf was a joy for Sirius and Harry, and Sirius had made sure to give her the most well-made knot clothes that he could. The elf was dressed in a modified pillowcase that was made of soft cotton and slightly dark beige in color. "Thank you, Taylor." Harry thanked the elf before following Penny outside. "So, what did you want to do, Penny?" It's a nice day. How about you show me how much progress you've made with the flute Hagrid gave you?" Penny asked, and Harry smiled slightly. "Prepare to be amazed, Penny. I can play a lullaby that won't make your ears bleed now," Harry proclaimed sarcastically, which made Penny giggle. Harry went to fetch the flute while Penny sat beneath a tree in the backyard waiting for him. "Going to serenade your girlfriend, Harry?" Sirius teased as he saw Harry walking outside with his wooden flute in hand. "Shut it!" Harry retorted as he made his way out and towards the tree Penny was sitting under. "You'd be so proud, James. So proud." Sirius chuckled to himself, watching Harry sit beside Penny under the tree from the kitchen window. It's Harry's birthday. Harry smiled as he sat at the kitchen table. Penny, Tonks, Andromeda, Ted, and Remus were all at Wood End Cottage to celebrate his birthday with him and Sirius. The cake was going to be brought out and present given soon, and the 12-year-old was as excited as any child. Sirius seemed almost as excited, but that could easily be put down to the man's enjoyment of festivities in general. "Harry, could you go find out what's keeping Nymphadora and Penelope?" Andromeda asked as the two teens had gone upstairs to chat a few minutes ago and had yet to return. "Sure thing." Harry nodded as he left the table and made his way upstairs. Finding the guest room door closed, Harry knocked before speaking. "Tonks, Penny, are you two in there?" "Come on in, Harry," Tonks called from the inside, and Harry opened the door just before Penny's rebuttal was heard. "Tonks!" Penny cried out in shock. Harry stopped dead at what was in front of him. Tonks, topless, along with Penny, also topless, though clearly only because she'd had her shirt and bra jinxed off by the mischievous metamorph. Needless to say, Harry's brain stopped functioning at that point, and he stood in the doorway, slack-jawed, his eyes wide. Penny quickly covered herself and turned her back to Harry. Tonks smiled widely, standing before him, with no shame as Harry got a long look at her breasts. "Happy birthday, Harry!" Tonks smiled as she reached for her bra and put it on. Penny was already pulling her shirt on her cheeks bright red while she glared at the metamorph. Harry couldn't form words just yet. His mind still stuck on the sight of his friend's breasts. "Tonks, I told you this was way too much for Harry. He's 12, Penny hissed at her friend before casting a worried look at Harry. "He's starting puberty, and you can't tell me he's not interested," Tonks argued as she pulled her shirt on. "I just wanted to make sure the first pair of tits he sees were ours. Neither of us wants some other girl at Hogwarts trying to tempt him. This way Harry knows we're interested for real." "This is still extreme," Penny retorted, fully dressed again. Though Tonks noticed that the blonde didn't refute her claim of showing Harry they were interested for real, as she put it. "Well, we should all be getting down to the kitchen. It's time for presents and cake." Tonks smiled as she guided Penny past Harry and out of the room. 2 minutes later, Sirius came upstairs to find his wayward godson. Seeing Harry standing in the doorway of the guest room staring blankly ahead made him pause. Waving his hand in front of Harry's eyes got no response. Sensing a prank, Sirius called downstairs. "Tonks, why is Harry near catatonic?" Sirius questioned loudly from beside Harry. "No idea, Sirius," Tonks' yelled reply came from downstairs. "Definitely don't believe that." Sirius shook his head as he gently shook Harry. Harry started for a moment before looking towards Sirius. "All right there, Harry?" Yeah. Never better." Harry nodded, his cheeks burning fiercely. Sirius noted the reaction and chuckled. "She got you good, huh?" Sirius chortled as he led his godson downstairs. "No!" Harry refuted instantly, and Sirius just broke out into laughter at the obvious lie. All in all, Harry could definitely say this was his best birthday so far. His dreams for the rest of the summer were filled with his two friends, however. Harry vowed that neither of them would ever find out. He'd never hear the end of the teasing otherwise. First week of August. Finally, Harry cheered as he held up the enchanted knife. He'd finally succeeded in making one that held both the durability and ever-sharp enchantments. This was the first step to making an artifact sword. Sure, it had taken him 67 tries to reach this first step, but progress was progress. Now, he could start putting together a runic array for his future sword. What can I make it do that'll set it apart from other magical swords throughout history? Harry mused as he placed his enchanted knife on his work table and looked it over. A sword was a much larger project, but the basics were the same. He'd practice forging a few one-handed swords to start, then he'd move on to trying to forge a two-handed sword. There were plenty of styles of swords he could try as well, but to begin with a simple one-handed broadsword would be his first goal. But let's take a break from this for now. I need a break from the forge. Let's make a few more test frames, and then start on the runic array for the sword afterwards. Harry thought aloud as he went about cleaning up the smithy and cooling the forge so he could make test frames. Harry had gotten rather good at producing his test frames now. The runic sequence was familiar, and he'd mastered the transfiguration required to make the stone frames. Applying the self-destruction sequence to the wooden overlays to protect his work was second nature by now. At the moment, Harry had 60 finished test frames secured in his smithy. His goal was to finish another 40 and sell all 100 just before he left for his second year at Hogwarts. Another 600 galleons would make for a nice little nest egg. Sirius had gifted Harry a nifty item known as a moleskin pouch for his birthday. Harry had been fascinated by the item and had to restrain himself from taking it apart to try and figure out how it worked. But seeing as they were rather rare, Harry had decided to simply use it to store as much money as he could. His rune safe had limited space inside, but with most of his money inside the moleskin pouch, he was able to store a far larger amount within the security of his safe. "Hey, Harry, you got more mail," Sirius called out as he held up a stack of envelopes and walked into the smithy. "Again! It never stops," Harry grumbled as he looked through his mail. "Strange. I haven't gotten any mail from my study buddies since the beginning of summer." But all this mail from every enchanter, scholar, and their mothers has come in almost non-stop since halfway through July. He mused on the curiousness of the lack of communication. Maybe write to them and see what's going on. Or you could flu them if you know their flu address. Sirius suggested, and Harry nodded. He didn't know the flu addresses, but Hedwig would do everything in her power to ensure his letters arrived at their destinations. I'll write to them and send the letters with Hedwig tonight. If they don't receive them, then I'll know something untoward is going on. Harry stated, and Sirius clapped him on the shoulder. If someone is interfering with your mail, they're going to rue the day they decided to do it. I'll bring every lawyer, attorney, barrister, and any other form of legal counsel in magical Britain down on their heads. The entire Black Fortune will barely see a dent from that, and I'll have them taken for everything they own before I'm done. Sirius ranted. He was very protective of his godson, after all. Harry smiled at the excessiveness of his godfather, but he appreciated the gesture. The thought of someone interfering with his mail was an unpleasant one. I guess I should look through these. Thankfully, I haven't missed a letter from Fleur yet. She's been studying some more obscure magical theory recently, and it's fascinating. Harry grinned as he went through the stack. Ah, yes, your French girlfriend? How is the young lady? Sirius teased as Harry swatted him with a random letter. Hush, you prat! It's not like that, Harry huffed at his godfather. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. How has your French mistress been doing? Sirius chuckled, and Harry sent a stinging hex at the man. That's worse than what you said before, Harry exclaimed as Sirius rubbed the spot where the hex had hit him. I regret nothing. Sirius grinned cheekily, making Harry grumble about lonely godfathers that needed to get out more. This is different. Harry blinked as he felt a thicker-than-normal envelope. Looking over the parchment revealed the envelope was signed in a foreign language. I need the translation spell again, he murmured, and Sirius grinned at being able to help his godson. A slightly complex movement of Sirius's wand and the words on the envelope were imposed by English words. To Artificer Potter, from Suzuki Toshu, Yokai Buki Seisaku Guild member, Ment Moriyoshi, Japan. Harry read off confused about the words that the translation spell didn't translate. Why is someone from Japan writing to me? Just a second, Harry. I know a slightly more specific translation spell that should be able to translate the rest of the words. Sirius stated as he twisted his wand in a few loops and 3 swishes. The words on the letter all became superimposed by English. So he's a guild member from a monster spirit weapon crafting guild? Harry wondered before deciding to open the letter. Pulling out the thick letter, Harry had Sirius use the translation spell again, so that he could read it. In essence, this man, Suzuki Toshu, had heard of him becoming the youngest artificer in history, and felt compelled to write to him. The man had sent him a detailed process for creature craft that his guild had specialized in for almost 1,000 years. The man had only given him the most basic of knowledge of the process, but Harry was still stunned. Mr. Suzuki was apparently of the belief that talent like his should be nurtured, hence the instruction on creature craft, but not coddled, which is why only the most basic process was sent. In the man's own words, you should be talented enough to make use of this. If you can't, then your skills only go so far. Which Harry felt was a bit of a backhanded compliment. Still, this knowledge of another branch of enchanting was amazing. Harry couldn't wait to look over it and transcribe it into English, so that he didn't have to keep asking Sirius for the translation spell. Seems you have another new thing to look into. Sirius teased, knowing his godson would definitely be studying this when he wasn't working on his current project. Yeah, I need a pen and one of my notebooks. Harry grinned as he pulled open the drawer under his work table and pulled out the items. Sirius chortled as his godson's attention was fully taken up by copying down the information present in the letter. Sirius would remind Harry of his other plans a bit later. The young artificer had a habit of letting new information become his sole focus, until he had it either committed to memory or written down. What's a rite of conquest? Harry asked aloud, and Sirius cocked an eyebrow at the term. He was aware of this one at least, so filled his godson in. It's a term used in a few magical topics. Sirius started, and Harry turned to listen to his godfather. Usually you hear about it in wand lore when a witch or wizard gains control and ownership of another's wand by defeating them in a duel. But it was also used to take over the lordship of houses and forcefully absorb other lines into the winner's back several centuries ago. According to this process, if you want an item made from creature craft to last more than a year or two, you have to properly conquer the magical creature in question through a rite of conquest. Only then can you impart the magical creature's properties onto the item you're making. Harry read off the sheets of the letter. If this is just the most basic stuff, it'll definitely take me a few years to get any real skill with this branch of enchanting. Don't take too much onto your plate, Harry. It's dangerous to stretch yourself too thin. Sirius warned his godson as he'd seen what overwork like that could lead to during his brief time with the Aurors. That's what I have you Tonks and Penny for, right? Harry grinned cheekily at his godfather. To pull me away from my work when I'm falling too far into it. Right you are, Harry. Right you are. Sirius laughed as he patted his godson on the back. This is funny, Mr. Suzuki wrote, that if I make anything worthwhile with this knowledge, to come show him in Japan. Harry chuckled as he held the page of the letter up to Sirius. Oh, hey, could make for an interesting summer trip sometime. Sirius shrugged as he read the page. The ladies of the East haven't ever experienced the wooing of the gentleman Sirius Black after all. I shouldn't keep them waiting forever. Aren't you still trying to woo your healer, Miss Reed? Harry questioned, knowing Sirius flirted with the woman every time he went in for his checkups. Marley is a wonderful woman. Sirius nodded. But if she wants to tame Sirius Black, she'll have to bring her best. He finished with a grin, while rubbing his chin with his index finger and thumb. I'm sure if she showed even a bit of interest, you'd be like a puppy begging for attention. Harry rolled his eyes with a laugh. Now, I'll have you know that I had dozens of admirers in my time, mister. Sirius practically pouted at his godson. Had being the key word there, Sirius. You aren't getting any younger, Harry replied, doing a semi-passable imitation of Andromeda's voice. Don't you start too, Sirius harumphed as he was reminded of Andromeda's prodding for him to settle down and start his own family. He'd get to it eventually. Just had to find the right woman, preferably one that would make his bigoted ancestors roll over in their graves. Imagining the ancient and noble House of Black having a Muggle-born or half-blood lady was the greatest prank Sirius would ever pull off, in his opinion. Yeah. Just let me finish copying this process down. I want to hit 100 test frames before the end of summer still. Harry waved at his godfather, making Sirius shake his head as he made his way out of the smithy. Typical Ravenclaw nerd, Sirius said just loud enough for Harry to hear. Oi! Harry yelled at the empty doorway. Only Sirius's laughter coming from outside could be heard in response to his indignation. Current mana levels, Harry, 1,182, Tonks, 5,876, Penelope, 4,518. Chapter 12. A warning of danger. A loud crash just after breakfast alerted Harry and Sirius that something was going on at Wood End Cottage. Both wizards charged into the kitchen to see Hedwig screeching and clawing at an unfamiliar elf, while Taylor wrestled letters from the other elf's grip. What the bloody hell is going on? Sirius demanded loudly, making both elves freeze up while Hedwig flew over to Harry. Hi, Master. Taylor found this elf trying to take young Master Harry's letters from Hedwig, Taylor accused as she handed the 3 letters over to Harry. Looking them over, Harry saw they were from his study buddies. Have you been taking all of my mail from my friends? Harry asked the unknown elf with a grimace. Dobby had to. Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts this year. The now-named Dobby pleaded while wringing his hands. Who has ordered this? Sirius demanded of the elf. Nobody. Dobby's not supposed to be being here, sir. Dobby nervously twisted his dirty pillowcase. What danger are you talking about? Harry asked Dobby. Dobby cannot say, Great Harry Potter, sir, Dobby replied, twisting his large ears. But horrible things are going to happen at Hogwarts this year. Dobby thought that if Harry Potter only received letters from people outside of Hogwarts, he wouldn't want to go back. Dobby, I have to return to Hogwarts. I'm a student there. Harry tried to console the elf with a gentle tone. But Great Harry Potter, sir, mustn't put himself in danger, Dobby cried out fearfully. Thanks to your warning, Dobby, we'll be able to inform the people that can prevent these bad things. Sirius reassured the distraught elf. Dobby has helped protect the Great Harry Potter? Dobby asked, his large eyes widening. You warned me ahead of time, Dobby. So now I'll have people that will look out for me and do everything they can to prevent these bad things. Harry nodded with a smile to the trembling elf. Oh, Great Harry Potter, sir, is too kind to Dobby, Dobby wailed as large tears of happiness ran down the elf's face. Harry Potter is truly a great wizard. Thank you for warning me, Dobby. I truly appreciate it. Harry thanked the crying elf. Of course, Harry Potter, sir. Dobby nodded vigorously, his large ears flapping. Dobby must be going before he's missed. Please be safe, Great Harry Potter, sir. With that and a pop, Dobby disappeared from Wood End Cottage. Well, this is bad news. Harry sighed and Sirius had a frown across his face. I'll flew Dumbledore and tell him about this. Sirius nodded as he headed towards the living room. With any luck, this forewarning will let Dumbledore put a stop to whatever these bad things are before they start. We can only hope. Harry sighed as he hoped his school year wouldn't be disrupted by whatever Dobby had tried to warn them about. But for now, he had letters from his friends to read and respond to. Hopefully, once he explained the situation, his study buddies wouldn't be cross with him. Diagon Alley is near the end of August. We should have done the shopping earlier, Harry grumbled as he and Sirius made their way through the crowded alley. It's not so bad, Harry. Sirius grinned, catching all the eyes turning to look at his godson. Speak for yourself, Sirius. Harry grumbled, feeling the crowd staring at him. If Miss Reed hadn't taken pity on you and agreed to a date last week, we could have gotten this done then. I just wanted to make sure she enjoyed herself. Sirius defended his multi-day planning of his first date since '81. It worked, too. Yet you still refuse to admit that you're doing exactly what I said you would if she showed any interest. Harry shook his head with an exaggerated sigh. I am not following her like a puppy. Sirius harumphed with his arms crossed. You are, completely and totally. Harry disagreed with a chuckle. But she's a wonderful woman, so try to be a gentleman. She is wonderful. Sirius nodded his head. Truly a beacon of kindness and care. Explains why she's giving you a chance. Woman's a saint. Harry chortled while Sirius grumbled about him spending too much time with Andy and Dora. I just need my textbooks and we'll be done. Harry mentioned looking over his school list. Why do I have to get one of every Gilderoy Lockhart book? Is the teacher some rabid fan of the man? Who knows? Sirius shrugged as they walked towards Flourish and Blots. Unfortunately, it looks like today was the wrong day. Looking up, Harry was greeted by a long line outside of the bookstore, and a large banner proclaiming that Gilderoy Lockhart would be signing copies of his new book, Magical Me, today. Maybe I'll be able to slip through the store unnoticed, at least, Harry asked with little hope. If anyone tries anything, they'll be dealing with me. Sirius promised, his hand patting his wrist. Harry knew that was where Sirius kept his wand holster and couldn't help the small smile that formed on his face. It was nice to have someone looking out for him. The duo made their way through the crowd with little fanfare after assuring the clerk that they weren't there for the book signing. Harry was able to collect his textbooks without much trouble. A few people greeted him a bit too enthusiastically, and Sirius interjected himself to end the encounter when it happened. Making their way up to the counter, Harry caught the attention of the man of the hour. Lockhart made his way over to Harry and actually reached out for him. Harry was already stepping back from the man when Sirius's hand grabbed onto Lockhart's wrist. Thanks, Sirius, Harry whispered, getting a nod from his godfather. Something I can help you with? Sirius asked Lockhart with a glare, and the blond man retracted his arm. I just thought Harry would want to get on the front page of the Prophet with me. Lockhart spoke up with his famous smile. Oh, he doesn't, Sirius stated flatly. The flash of a large wizarding camera going off in their direction indicated that Harry would probably be on the front page tomorrow regardless. Lockhart quickly went back to the middle of the crowd and made the announcement that he would be the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts this year. You've got to be kidding me. Harry grimaced as the blond man posed like a peacock for the cameras after his announcement. A bit of mana to his glasses, and Harry got a reading on his soon-to-be professor. What? Are you kidding me? 1,158? That's it? He thought to himself at the low reading for an adult wizard. He had to be the only one that applied. No way Dumbledore would hire him if he had any other options. Harry muttered, making Sirius chuckle. Maybe he's the terrible thing happening this year? Sirius joked as he and Harry walked up to the counter and started getting the textbooks purchased. I wish that was the extent of it, but I somehow doubt it. Harry sighed as Sirius paid for the books. Just as they were turning to leave, a fight broke out amongst two of the customers in the shop. From the distinct hair colors, it was easy for Sirius to tell who the fighters were. As they were close, Sirius went to help separate his red-haired acquaintance from the Death Eater he was punching. Though not before giving some encouragement, of course. Hey, hit him harder, Arthur! Sirius crowed happily, watching Arthur Weasley punch Lucius Malfoy, while the two men tussled on the ground. Sirius? Molly Weasley questioned before raising her voice. Don't encourage him. Stop this. Come on, you two, break it up, Sirius hollered as he pulled Arthur off of Lucius. Good punches there, Arthur, he whispered to the man with a grin as the Malfoy patriarch was standing from the floor. Black, Lucius greeted stiffly. Not very polite of you, Lucius. You forgot to address me with my title, Sirius replied regally, though the undercurrent of amusement in his voice was impossible to miss. Lord Black. Lucius greeted a second time, his face carefully controlled but his eyes burning with rage. How are you today, Malfoy? Sirius questioned as Molly fussed over Arthur. Fine, thank you. Come along, Draco, Lucius answered brusquely as he ushered his son out of the bookstore. Still a wanker. Sirius chortled to himself, seeing the man leave. How have you been, Arthur? He greeted his acquaintance, making the older redhead smile and shake his hand. Doing well, Sirius. Heard you've been healing. Molly and I were so pleased to hear about your recovery. Arthur smiled even as a small bruise was forming on his jaw. Hey, Molly, how are you? The kids doing well? Sirius asked, and the matriarch of the Weasley family smiled and confirmed that she and the kids were doing well. Sirius listened with a grin as Molly told him about her children. Bill and Charlie had graduated Hogwarts while he'd been in a coma, so it was interesting to hear about what the two kids had grown up to become. "Wicked didn't think we'd get to meet you here, Harry," Ron Weasley commented as he and the twins stood before Harry. The little red-haired girl next to them must have been their sister. Was honestly hoping to not have a spectacle made of just shopping for my school things. Should have known better, I suppose. Harry shrugged with a polite smile. "Hey, Harry, before Mum notices or Percy gets back, could you give us a little reading?" The twin on the right asked, while the twin on the left acted as the lookout for Percy or their mother's attention. Ron and Ginny's eyes widened at the idea, and Harry didn't see the harm. "Sure, why not?" Harry replied. "Your father's apparently friends with Sirius, so I'm sure he wouldn't mind." With a little manna to his glasses, Harry looked at the twin who asked and got the first reading, changing his gaze over to the lookout twin. Harry repeated the mana activation of his glasses' scouter function, getting another reading, repeating this while looking at Ron, and then the little sister gave Harry everything he needed. "So what's the reading like?" the first twin asked, seeing Harry refocus on him. "You." Harry started, but didn't know which twin he was addressing. Fred informed eagerly. "Right, well, Fred, you have a mana reading of 2,688, Harry informed him. Getting the other twin's attention, Harry continued. "George, you have a reading of 2,694, while Ron has a reading of 438, and your sister has a reading of 106. Hear that, Fred? I'm a wee bit stronger than you." George chuckled at his twin. "Not by much, Pratt," Fred remarked. "Now, how are the twins so much stronger than us?" Ron questioned, looking at both of his brothers, annoyed. The sister looked on shyly, but also curious about what her reading meant when compared to others her age. She hadn't even been to Hogwarts yet, after all. "Probably because we aren't lazy prats," Fred snarked while George nodded sagely, making Ron's ears go red. "What are you at nowadays, Harry? We haven't heard any updates since you showed us the test frame back at Hogwarts." George inquired, and Harry figured it wouldn't hurt to tell them. "I've been trying to keep up my practice while still working on my enchanting. I've made some decent progress, I think. Last I checked, I was at 1-3-12. Harry shrugged. "Ready to go, Harry?" Sirius asked, and Harry nodded before bidding the Weasleys goodbye. A short time later, and the duo were once more in the comfort of Wood End Cottage. "I'm thinking this year's going to be annoying with that peacock as a professor," Harry commented, and Sirius chuckled at his godson's put-upon expression. "If he does anything stupid, just let Dumbledore know," Sirius advised. "I'm sure Dumbledore just had a lack of candidates like you thought." "I would hope so. The man seems like a bit of a joke so far." Harry shook his head, exasperated. The duo was interrupted in their conversation by the arrival of a happy metamorph, who practically pranced out of the flue. You're looking at the newest Auror cadet with advanced placement, directly under the senior Auror, Alastair Mad-Eye Moody himself. Tonks cheered happily, making Harry and Sirius clap for her. "Congratulations, Dora. I knew you'd make it in." Sirius praised his second cousin, even though they mostly viewed each other with an uncle-niece type of relationship. "Good job, Tonks," Harry smiled widely. Tonks smiled back before moving over and sitting next to him quickly. "It's thanks to your talisman, Harry. I even aced the stealth test since I didn't trip even once," Tonks exclaimed as she wrapped him in a hug, which Harry returned. "So, to say thank you for your awesome gift, you get a reward." "What?" Harry asked, only for Tonks' smile to turn into a devious grin. Before Harry could do anything, the ecstatic metamorph began raining kisses on his cheeks, over and over again. "Tonks, stop! Sirius is watching." Said godfather was happily laughing at his godson's misfortune, while Tonks continued to smother Harry's cheeks with kisses. After a few minutes of embarrassing Harry in front of Sirius, Tonks stopped her kisses and just hugged Harry tightly. But Harry, I truly want to say thank you." Tonks smiled brightly at him as they pulled away from each other. "I've gotten to achieve a place in my chosen career right out of Hogwarts thanks to your help. It means more than I can say, so thank you, Harry." "I only made a talisman to help you, Tonks. You did all of the real work," Harry smiled back. "Don't sell all of your studying and practice short. You earned your position." "Yep, I'm keeping you." Tonks smiled as she pulled Harry back into a hug. Sirius's roaring laughter only made Harry annoyed, since he was kind of ruining what would be a heartfelt moment. At least he had gotten used to Tonks' affection since they'd know each other. Tonks would leave a short time later to go share the news with Penny, leaving Sirius and Harry to get Harry's school things packed into his trunk. September 1st, Harry waved to Sirius and Remus as the Hogwarts Express pulled away from King's Cross. He and Penny were sharing a compartment along with a small blonde girl called Luna Lovegood. The blonde was a bit spacey, or moon-brained as Harry had heard others call it in the magical world, but she was nice enough and Penny had taken a liking to the younger blonde. The trip was uneventful for the most part. Harry's study buddies had stopped by for a bit to chat. The trolley lady had come and gone. As they approached the school, Harry had exited the compartment and waited outside for the girls to change into their robes. Once they were done, he had changed in the compartment while they waited outside. Fur's years! Fur's years over here! Hagrid called as they stepped off the train. Luna smiled at Penny and Harry and thanked them for riding with her. The spacey blonde then skipped off towards the gentle giant. She's a fun one, Harry remarked as he followed Penny towards the carriages. A bit spacey, but she's smart under it, probably a Ravenclaw. Penny smiled, and Harry considered it likely. That or a Hufflepuff, with how friendly the little blonde was. A ride up to the school didn't take long, and soon the sorting was underway. Told you. Penny smiled as she clapped along with the rest of the Ravenclaw table when Luna Lovegood was sorted into their house. I never said anything against it, Harry replied as he waved Luna over to them, and the small blonde skipped over to them and sat next to Penny. From there, Harry and Penny both found that Luna was a bit of an odd duck during mealtimes. She preferred to make her food into shapes or vague sculptures before she ate. Harry found it amusing, while Penny sighed and encouraged Luna to eat faster so she got enough real food before dessert. When dessert did come, they discovered Luna had a love of pudding, the blonde happily partaking of every variety within reach. It wasn't long after that the students made their way to their dorms. Penny led the way for the Ravenclaws, and Harry was looking forward to some reading before bed. Hopefully, with a good night's sleep, he'd be prepared to deal with the first day of classes. He was already dreading getting his timetable tomorrow, if only because he didn't want to know when he'd have to be in the presence of either Snape or Lockhart. The blonde peacock had already made a showing of himself at dinner when Dumbledore announced him. Harry really felt like the man was much more pomp than substance. First defense against the dark arts class. I was right. Harry huffed to himself, watching Lockhart strut around the front of the classroom. Then the narcissist had the gall to make them take a test about himself. Who the hell cares what this moron's favorite color is? Harry raged in his own mind. The blonde idiot, as Harry now dubbed the man in his mind, then proceeded to unleash Cornish pixies on the classroom. The troublemaking little sprites had quickly started tearing the classroom up after easily taking Lockhart's wand and tossing it out of the window. Students, use what you've learned from my books to stop the pixies, Lockhart called out as the pixies finished destroying the front of the room, while Lockhart literally hid under the professor's desk. Absolutely useless, Harry growled as the pixies started zipping towards the students. Stop, he intoned, and his voice echoed with power. A nifty little trick that Penny had found out was that verbally stating the intent of a wandless spell gave a noticeable improvement. It didn't even have to be a proper incantation, just the intent behind the magic itself. Harry awed his entire class by demonstrating this with his command. The Cornish pixies all froze in midair and hung there, stopped in whatever position they'd been in at the time. The impedimenta jinx slowed a target or targets down. Taking that spell a bit further resulted in the Immobilis charm, which rendered said target or targets completely immobilized. It had been easy for Harry to refine his wandless impedimenta into a wandless immobilis over the summer. With a movement of his hands, Harry made the floating pixies gather into one area. Then he simply continued using levitation to stuff the little troublemakers back into their cage. A wandless colloportus charm had the cage door locked, and only then did Harry release his first spell. The now free pixies instantly went back to flitting about their cage, but were clearly staying away from the cage door. Harry's magical display had frightened the little blighters into staying within their cage. Excellent, Mr. Potter. Simply excellent. I trust you remembered that from the time when Lockhart began only to be cut off by Harry. Shut it, you pompous windbag, Harry growled at the incompetent man. Do you have any idea what a swarm of Cornish pixies could do unprepared students? How the bloody hell did you think this was a good idea? You're so incompetent. You make Professor Quirrell from last year look good. At the very least, the man tried to teach even with his horrible stutter. The young artificer raged at the blonde twit. Make no mistake, I'll be reporting this to both my head of house and the headmaster. With that said, Harry wandlessly summoned his bag to himself and stormed out of the room. He was going to do just what he said and see Flitwick and Dumbledore about that idiot. That is most troubling indeed, Mr. Potter. Flitwick grumbled as he finished listening to Harry's account of what happened in his first defense against the dark arts class of the year. In truth, the part-goblin charms master was tightly reining in his emotions, lest he storm into Lockhart's office and tear strips from the man for endangering the students. Should I go to the headmaster with this too, Professor? Harry asked his head of house. You should prepare for your next class, Mr. Potter, Flitwick advised the second year. I have a free period right now, so I'll personally see the headmaster about what Professor Lockhart has done. All right, Professor, thank you for seeing me so quickly. Harry thanked the charms professor, and Flitwick dismissed him from his office. Flitwick sat in his office for several minutes after Harry left to cool his head, before he made his way to Dumbledore's office. He wasn't one to judge others, but Lockhart was proving to be a less than competent teacher compared to his reputation. Dumbledore's office, and several minutes later, I see. That is most troubling, Phileas. Dumbledore nodded as he mulled over what he'd just heard. Perhaps Professor Lockhart will need some assistance with his first time teaching? I believe I can clear some time in my schedule to sit in on a few of his lessons. If I see anything else like this, I'm afraid I'll have to try and find a replacement. As it stands, I think a notice of deficiency will serve to let Professor Lockhart know that his current methods are not up to Hogwarts standards. I believe that would be for the best, Flitwick nodded. A notice of deficiency was basically a warning to a professor that their performance was currently unacceptable. It was the first step in the process of dismissal for a professor. Professor Snape had quite a few brought against him over his years as potions professor. But the man's Newt graduates were some of the best potioneers in magical Britain and even magical Europe. So the head of Slytherin had managed to retain his position at Hogwarts through the sheer competency he could produce in the students that did make it through his classes. After classes, Harry quickly made his way towards his hidden workshop with Penny in tow. Once there, Harry tested that the ward lock was still working before the two entered. Harry checked over the workshop area before heading into the smithy. Everything was as Harry had left it at the beginning of summer. Penny checked over the transfiguration that made up the forge and happily stated that the stone showed no signs of reverting. This was a testament to Tonks and Penny's success with their permanent transfiguration. Of course, it only worked because they were changing stone into a different shape of stone. They hadn't transfigured it into another material or tried to expand or shrink it. The stone was still the same at the base level, just in a different shape, so permanent transfiguration was possible. Harry was pleased that his setup at Hogwarts was still in good condition so that he could continue his work on forging an artifact sword. He had started to compile runic sequences for various effects, and now had to work out which ones would go together and result in a functional runic array. He had a general idea of what he wanted the sword to be capable of, and now it was down to him to find a combination of sequences that would work. Harry set to work writing out various runic sequences at his desk, while Penny practiced her wandless magic. The pretty blonde was making good headway on getting her entire spell repertoire wandless. That fact made both Harry and Tonks a bit jealous of the prefect. Penny seemed to have a knack for getting spells to work for her, and had easily left Tonks and Harry in the dust with how many wandless spells she had under her belt. A couple of hours later, and Harry sighed as he looked over his work so far. Several of the sequences he'd hoped to incorporate together wouldn't work, even with magical circuits. The materials he had at his disposal simply couldn't hold several of these properties at the same time. With some more time, he may be able to make a low-grade alchemical metal that could, theoretically, hold some of them in a single array. But that was still a long shot. He'd have to work slowly and make some arrays that were successful combinations of the various sequences he wanted for his final sword. Then he'd potentially find a way to transmute a metal capable of holding the finished array, while also finding out how to make said final array in the process. This was going to be a very long project, and Harry could only sigh that his classes were going to take up so much of his time. "Harry, can I borrow the test frame?" Penny asked as she walked over to his desk. "You don't have to ask Penny." Harry reassured the blonde as he handed her the test frame. After pulling it out of the drawer, he kept it in. "Maybe not, but it is still polite to ask." Penny smiled as she held the talisman in her hands and fed her mana into it. When her reading popped up, Penny grinned happily before turning to show Harry the 4762 displayed. Yeah, rub it in, why don't you?" Harry huffed, seeing how far he still had to go to even get close to Penny or Tonks' mana levels. Harry chose to place the even higher numbers, like Dumbledore, or the insane number that Flamel had, on the back burner for now. He'd grow stronger as he practiced, and so far, he was striking a good balance between his wandless magic and his enchanting. Again, he lamented at all the time he'd have to devote to his classes. That was time he could add to his enchanting or wandless practice. But even he realized that most of his courses still offered him new knowledge. For now, it wasn't wise or feasible to try and leave Hogwarts. Maybe in the coming years, though? No one ever said you couldn't graduate early. He mused to himself as he and Penny left the workshop together and headed for Ravenclaw Tower. Current mana levels: Harry, 1,312, Tonks, 5,876, outdated, Penelope, 4,762. Chapter 13. Alchemy, Prefect, Halloween. Harry was walking toward his hidden workshop after the end of classes. Today he would be attempting more alchemy to try and create an alchemical metal capable of holding the first of his prototype arrays. He was only half paying attention to his surroundings as he walked, since the path was so familiar to him now. It came as a bit of a surprise to run into Luna Lovegood in the out-of-the-way corridor that led to his workshop. "Hello, Harry. Nice to see you again." Luna smiled with a lilting tone. Harry couldn't help but smile back at the moon-brained blonde. He wondered if the rumors about the Lovegood family having some Fey ancestry might have some truth to them. "Good afternoon, Luna. How are you today?" Harry greeted, and Luna's smile became more meaningful as he saw her gaze sharpen and focus on him completely. "I'm doing well, thank you for asking," Luna chirped back happily. "What brings you to this part of the castle, Luna?" Harry asked. This corridor was well off the beaten path for most anyone. It was one of the reasons he'd chosen it when looking for a place to practice. There are many secrets in Hogwarts, Luna stated before tilting her head slightly. But I feel the one in this corridor isn't Hogwarts' secret, but someone else's. How do you know there is a secret here? Harry asked, trying to school his features. How Luna could have figured out where his hidden workshop was by herself greatly interested Harry. I told you, I feel it, Luna repeated before she giggled slightly. Also, you always head in this direction after classes, and no one sees you for hours afterwards. So you have to be going somewhere. Right. Harry sighed before smiling fondly at the quirky blonde. In the month since term started, Luna had become another friend of his, much like his study buddies, and Penny had taken a liking to her fellow blonde. Ah, what the hell. Do you want to see the secret, Luna? He asked, and Luna nodded, still smiling gently. That's neat, Luna commented as Harry revealed the door to his workshop. Glad you like it. Harry chuckled as he opened the door and allowed Luna inside. The little blonde moved around the workshop, inspecting everything with her eyes. She made small sounds of wonder every now and then, and Harry followed her into the smithy so she could have a look. You've made yourself very comfortable here, Harry, Luna mentioned after the tour of the workshop. Now I can work in peace and try out new things. Harry shrugged and Luna flitted about the room. Feel free to hang out here for a bit if you want. I'm going to be trying my hand at a bit more alchemy. Luna nodded as she picked up a book on charms that had been left in the room. The small blonde happily set herself in a chair off to the side of the room and began reading. Harry chuckled at how easy Luna was to please, and set to work removing one of the metal plates that came with his alchemist starter kit. It had a pre-etched transmutation circle already capable of being used on it. That saved Harry quite a bit of time drawing it out himself. He was going to attempt to transmute his first alchemical metal, Ulm. He'd chosen Ulm since it was a very basic and low-grade alchemical metal. If you knew how to transmute and could measure out the proper amounts of the mundane ingredients, Ulm wasn't difficult to make. While it wasn't really any stronger than mundane steel, it did have quite a useful amount of magic conductivity. That is, magic flowed through it well without breaking the metal down. So it made a good base to try forging a magical blade from. Now Harry just needed to measure out his ingredients. It was a good thing he'd ordered a good amount through Owl Order before returning to school. All right, so Ulm's base ingredients are iron, copper, and ground dragon bone. Harry mumbled to himself as he gathered the materials. 1 kilogram of iron, 1 kilogram of copper, and finally 500 grams of powdered dragon bone. He continued to mutter as he measured out his ingredients on the set of scales that came with the kit. He then placed the measured materials on the transmutation circle and prepared to pour his mana into the plate. Here goes nothing, he mused before sending his mana into the plate. The transmutation circle began to glow a bright blue as Harry's mana filled it. After a few seconds, the only magical material, the powdered dragon bone, began to glow white-blue and quickly spread to the iron and copper. Harry watched on fascinated as the three materials seemingly merged together as they glowed. Small sparks of magical discharge came from the materials as they were transmuted, and when the process finished, Harry pulled his hands away from the plate. The newly transmuted metal was giving off small bits of light that floated about like dust particles. According to the instructions, once the light fades away, I can test it to see if I was successful. Harry nodded to himself as he looked over the beginner's alchemy for Enchanter's book again to confirm. In just about a minute, the glow faded and Harry picked up the transmuted metal. It was a dull gray color and weighed the same as the original materials combined. Other than that, it had no real distinct features. All right, time to test it. Harry breathed deeply before exhaling to get rid of nerves. A small amount of mana flowed from Harry's hand and into the metal he was holding. The metal showed no reaction, so he poured a bit more mana into it. After a few moments, just when Harry was starting to think he'd failed, the metal in his hand began to glow faintly, and even maintained the glow for several seconds after he stopped supplying mana to it. I think you succeeded, Harry. Luna piped up from where she was reading. The spacey blonde had watched the transmutation and felt the need to speak up. I think so, too. Harry grinned as he looked at the Ulm in his hand. Even though it was low-grade alchemical metal, it was still magical metal and should, theoretically, be able to hold more complex runic arrays than mundane iron or steel. Now I just have to forge you into the proper form and apply an array. He smiled as he thought about which arrays he'd already worked out. None of them were everything he wanted in his artifact sword, but each array was a separate part of the overall whole that would, someday, make up his artifact sword. A week later, Luna, why are you here? Penny asked as she was led into Harry's workshop and spotted the little blonde. Harry lets me hang out here and study if I want when he's in here working. Luna replied as she went over her homework. At a desk Harry had moved into the corner of his workshop for her. Well, that's nice of him. Penny smiled at Harry and got a smile back from the Artificer. Harry himself was busy preparing his newest batch of Ulm for the forge. His first bit hadn't gone well. Harry had never tried to forge with magical metal before, so there was a very high chance that he'd make a mistake. He had, and it had left his an inert slag after he'd made it too hot and basically beaten the magic out of it. Still, Harry was confident he'd finally worked out the kinks of working with So now he was preparing the next several ingots he'd made of the stuff for forge shaping. "Luna, where are your shoes?" Penny asked, and Harry looked up and saw the little blonde's bare feet exposed from beneath her robes. "I couldn't find them this morning, so I had to go to classes without them. I didn't want to be late or miss a class," Luna replied, looking at her feet. "Did someone take your shoes, Luna?" Penny questioned gently, though Harry could practically feel the prefect's magic trembling with rage. "I suppose it's possible." Luna looked saddened by this admission. "Several of our housemates don't seem to like me talking about the creatures we report about in the Quibbler." Penny gently rubbed the first year's back and pulled her into a comforting hug. Harry frowned at what Luna had said. Bullying was for those of lesser mind, not the supposedly intelligent types that made up the Ravenclaw house. It seemed Luna would be needing a wardlock of her own for her dorm room. That wouldn't take him long and would solve part of the problem, at least. "Don't worry, Luna. I'll find your things and make sure those responsible are punished for it," Penny assured the younger blonde. "It's my responsibility as a prefect, after all." Luna nodded into the hug and mumbled a quiet "thank you" to the sixth-year prefect. Same night, Ravenclaw Common Room. That night in the Ravenclaw Common Room was one no student of the house would forget. They saw polite Penelope Clearwater truly angry for the first time. Harry had already made the wardlock for Luna and showed her how to use it. He'd gotten a hug from the happy blonde for it, and was now sitting beside her as Penny worked herself up into a proper rage. "I can't believe what I'm seeing!" Penny yelled as she used a wandless summoning charm to retrieve Luna's missing things from around the Ravenclaw Tower. Many of her possession had come floating down from the girls' dorms, and several girls looked very shocked when certain items floated into the common room. "Do you all have no decency, no shame?" "She's a first year," Penny yelled at the girls that had basically outed themselves as responsible. Once Luna's stolen things were all in the room, Harry and Luna picked them up and carried them to the little blonde's room. They could still hear Penny's angry voice even from upstairs, well, as far as Harry could go, of course. Boys couldn't actually set foot on the first landing without being tossed off and making an alarm go off. "Wands!" Penny commanded, and the wands of 7 different girls, the ones that had practically outed themselves, flew from wherever the girls normally kept them and into the prefect's hand. "You lot will follow me to Professor Flitwick's office immediately," she ordered, and when the girls looked obstinate, the blonde simply willed her intent upon them. All 7 found themselves being floated through the air by their robes and following the enraged Penny as she marched out of the common room. The entirety of Ravenclaw House simply stared at the door leading out of the common room in shock. Not even the 7th years made a noise for several moments. None of them had known that Penny was capable of that at all. To wandlessly summon all of the stolen items from this distance, to take 7 wands that were all stashed away on their owner's person, and then to levitate 7 other people like it was nothing. It was mind-boggling to the other students. The fact that Penny had done it all without even drawing her own wand left many of them shaken. I wouldn't recommend making her upset like this again. Harry spoke up as he passed through the common room and headed toward the stairs for the boys' dorms. She didn't even get aggressive enough to use hexes or jinxes. They all got off light compared to what I've seen her do. With his piece said, Harry ascended the stairs to his dorm room for the night. The next weekend was Saturday. Almost. Just a few more centimeters. Harry mumbled to himself as he carefully filled in the last line of the magic circuit he'd etched into one of the knives he'd forged. Circuit base slowly poured from the tip of the alchemic pen as he carefully filled in the line. And done! He smiled as he put the pen down and let his creation cool and solidify. This was the first knife he'd finished so far. He'd ended up ruining the first 3 he'd tried to etch arrays into. Was low grade for a reason, as it could lose the magic inherent in the metal with improper handling. Man, what I wouldn't give to have some orichalcum, Harry thought to himself as he waited so that he could test his knife. Orichalcum was much higher grade magic metal, and its intrinsic magical properties made it one of the best substances for conducting magic in the world. Unfortunately, it was still rather far out of Harry's limited ability with alchemy to even attempt to produce. Maybe in a year or 2 he'd have the skill to try and transmute it. But for now, it was just wishful thinking. Seeing the knife set and ready, Harry picked the knife up and set about testing it. The array he'd chosen to etch into this knife incorporated 4 different runic sequences: cut prevention, durability, severance, and his own unique sequence for mana, the same as he used for the counting sequence to identify in his scouters and test frames. It would probably seem odd for any magical bladesmith to have both the severance sequence and the cut prevention sequence on the same blade. Cut prevention made a blade dull for all intents and purposes, which made a blade useless unless it was paired with an activation-deactivation sequence, while the severance sequence allowed a blade to slice through things that would normally be too hard or durable for it to cut through. But that was one of Harry's end goals for his artifact sword. a blade that wouldn't cut anyone or anything, except exactly what was specified in the array. In this case, Harry wanted the knife to be able to cut mana or magic. Admittedly, his 12-year-old mind thought slicing spells apart would be really cool, so he'd set out to make that his artifact sword's claim to fame. How cool will it be to have a spell-cutting sword? Harry pondered an excited grin on his face. All right, first test, cutting a Lumos charm. Harry grinned as he brought a ball of light into existence. Moving the blade through the ball of light yielded no results, however. Well, shite, he muttered before trying a few different methods. He stabbed the ball of light to the same results. He tried swinging the knife faster, but to no change in the light at all. My array should be working, but there is no change at all? The array works out, in theory anyway, but in practice not so much. Did I make it too specific, or was I not specific enough? The young artificer wondered as he looked at the knife in his hand, while pacing back and forth across the length of his workshop. Going back to his desk, he set the knife down and pulled out his papers that he'd worked the array out on. He started perusing the lines of runes looking for what could have gone wrong. After almost an hour of not finding any reason for the lack of effect, an alarm spell went off, and Harry tapped his wand to cancel it. Time to meet with the study group already? Harry mused as he placed his hands on top of his desk as he stood up. Feeling cold metal beneath his palm, Harry looked down and saw his ohm knife. Good thing I worked in the cut prevention sequence after all. That could have hurt otherwise. He chuckled as he tapped the blade with his index finger. The sudden feeling of his finger getting the pins and needles of being asleep was a surprise, and Harry narrowed his eyes while looking over his finger. What in the world? He wondered as he shook his hand and tried to flex his fingers. After a couple of attempts, he got feeling back into his index finger and shook his hand. Well, isn't that interesting? Harry questioned rhetorically to the empty workshop. Giving the failed knife another look over, Harry decided to look into it later. He'd agreed to meet with his study buddies today, and he wanted to introduce Luna to them. The little blonde could definitely use more friends. The library. Hello, Harry. Luna smiled, seeing Harry walk into the library. He had asked her to meet him here at this time, so she'd come, but she had no idea what it was Harry wanted. Hey, Luna, thanks for meeting me. Harry greeted as he motioned for Luna to follow him. So why did you want to meet in the library? You asked me to bring my homework and books, so I'm assuming we're studying? Luna questioned, and Harry nodded. Yep, I also want to help you make a few more friends, Harry replied, and Luna looked curious. There are others that would like to be my friends? Who are they? Luna inquired, since she hadn't made any friends besides Penny and Harry since she started at Hogwarts. Follow me, and I'll introduce you. Harry answered as he made his way over to the table his study buddies were currently occupying. Hey, Padma, Mandy, Hermione, how are you three this afternoon? Hey, Harry, doing good, Mandy replied with a grin. Studying for Transfiguration at the moment. Padma motioned towards their books. Good afternoon, Harry. Hermione smiled before noticing Luna. Who is this? This is Luna Lovegood. She's in Ravenclaw with Padma, Mandy, and I. Harry introduced, which prompted Padma and Mandy to greet the little blonde. She's had a bit of difficulty making friends because she likes to talk about magical cryptids. But she's sweet as can be and could really use a few more friends. It was really mean of those girls to take your things, Luna. Do you want to study with our little group? Mandy asked, even though she was already making a place for the first year. We can help you out with anything you don't understand, Padma assured Luna as she scooted over so that younger girl could sit between her and Mandy. We'd be happy to have you, Luna. Hermione agreed with a smile towards the first year. Thank you very much. Luna thanked the girls as she sat between Padma and Mandy and started taking out her things. Don't mention it, Luna. Mandy grinned as she pulled the other girl into a side hug. Harry was pretty sure Luna couldn't have looked happier if she tried. After a few minutes of getting settled, Mandy asked everyone if they'd been using the common room test frames. When she got back all positive replies, except from Harry, who simply used his own in his workshop. Not that any of them knew that. She'd asked about their most recent readings. I checked this morning and was at 462, Padma informed the group. Bugger, you're still beating me. I'm only at 456 right now. Mandy playfully pouted at her friend. I was at 470 when I checked last night before bed. Hermione spoke up, and Padma and Mandy both playfully accused her of extra practice to one-up them. I got a 138 this morning before breakfast. Luna smiled, and the older girls gave her encouragement for her reading. All of them told her they could practice together, and she'd definitely see her reading go up even higher. The little blonde quickly agreed to the extra practice with a bright smile. What? Harry asked when all of the girls turned to look at him. What was your last reading? Padma asked curiously. Oh, I was at 1536 when I checked a few days ago. Harry replied, and all the girls, except Luna, who just smiled, had shocked looks on their faces. How the bloody hell? Mandy questioned. Language! Hermione chided her friend, and Mandy barely acknowledged it. That is very impressive, Harry, Padma stated with a nod. I've just been practicing when I need a break from enchanting. Harry shrugged since he'd been trying to keep as even a balance between wandless practice and enchanting as he could. He'd wandlessly completed a nifty new charm yesterday called Similitudo, or the reflected image charm. It made an illusionary copy of the caster that mimicked all of the person's actions, but in the opposite, just like a reflection in a mirror. To test it, Harry had cast the spell and then walked towards a wall of his workshop. To his amusement, the copy had walked in the opposite direction. He thought he might show this one to Tonks, since it could be useful for confusing a hostile witch or wizard. "You've got to be cheating somehow," Mandy playfully accused, and Harry stuck his nose in the air and acted snooty to go along with it. It was an enjoyable study session, and Harry could only smile when he saw how well Luna had been integrated into their little study group. It was nice to see the first year laughing as she listened to Mandy make jokes. Halloween. It was a lovely and festive feast to celebrate the holiday, and Harry was having a good time. Penny had to constantly check on Luna to make sure the girl didn't eat nothing but sweets for the whole feast. This made Harry chuckle as he let himself have an extra helping of treacle tart. The decorations were fabulous, just as they were last year, and as long as no trolls found their way into the castle, or were let in, Harry reminded himself, then the evening would be great. There was even some music playing throughout the feast, and Harry was curious if the songs were all traditional for the holiday. Once the food had disappeared and the students began making their way out of the Great Hall, Harry was fairly certain this would be a good Halloween. I shouldn't have even thought it. Harry grumbled lowly to himself as a large crowd of students gathered around a second-floor bathroom that had apparently flooded. At least judging by the water all over the corridor and the bathroom door still having water pouring from under it. What was the cause of the large congregation of students, one might ask? Large words written on the stone wall of the corridor in what appeared to be blood. Plus, Mrs. Norris, caretaker Filch's menace of a cat, was hanging from a wall sconce, completely immobile, and the man was howling about his cat being dead. Enemies of the heir, beware. Draco Malfoy read off the wall before smirking. You'll be next, Mudbloods. How the hell did he come to that conclusion? Harry wondered incredulously, trying to figure out Malfoy's leap in logic. It only states enemies of the heir, and that could mean anyone that this person wants it to. For all he knows, the enemies could be anyone in the castle that isn't related to Slytherin. That seems especially likely, considering the fact they went out of their way to use the term heir for themselves. Harry had found out about the so-called Chamber of Secrets last year in the library, when he'd been looking into the history of the magical castle. Suffice to say, he wasn't exactly impressed by Salazar Slytherin's ideals, nor was he sure that the man was even sane, considering he supposedly left a monster of some kind hidden in his secret chamber to one day purge the school of the unworthy. The arrival of the professors saw the students quickly being ushered off to their house common rooms as the area was cleared. I think I can be certain that this is what Dobby was trying to warn me about. Harry grimaced as he recalled the fear the little house elf had shown back in the summer. He had a letter to write to Sirius tonight. Current mana levels, Harry 1536, Tonks 5876, outdated, Penelope 4762, outdated. Chapter 14, History, Advancement, Questions. So it's been opened before? Harry asked to confirm what Penny had just told him. Yes, about 50 years ago, in fact. Penny nodded as they sat in the hidden workshop. So what does this mean in the here and now? Harry questioned, and Penny could only postulate. It could mean that whoever opened the chamber 50 years ago has returned to the castle. Or perhaps the descendant of that person is a new student. Penny shrugged as she mulled over possibilities. Neither option is particularly good. Harry sighed while running a hand through his hair. Though, since we don't have any new staff, except that peacock, I don't think the original perpetrator's back. So it's probably a student, maybe even a first year. Penny hummed in thought. Not that suspecting this narrows it down any. We have almost 40 new first years this year. And hopefully the staff can deal with this quickly. Harry hoped as he looked at the notes Penny had made about the last Chamber of Secrets incident. A student actually died last time. I would hope the staff would close the school before it gets that bad again. Why wouldn't they? Penny questioned. The safety of the students should be their first priority as professors. Penny, even you know that the magical world often lacks what most non-magicals would call common sense. Harry replied flatly, and Penny exhaled deeply before nodding. I'll look into what this monster could possibly be, Penny informed Harry as she collected her notes. Knowing Slytherin, it's probably some kind of magical serpent, though it would have to be one that could either live for over 1,000 years or be able to sustain a breeding population in an isolated space for the same amount of time. That should at least narrow it down a bit, right? Harry asked, and Penny nodded. It should. Even magical species have lifespans. I'm not the most learned in care of magical creatures, but surely there can't be that many magical snakes that fit these criteria. Penny gave him a hopeful smile. Harry found it hard to put much hope into his return smile, though. Shortly afterwards, Penny left the workshop to head back to the library. Harry set about transmuting more Ulm. If there really was a monster being awoken from a 50-year slumber, then having any advantage, even a magical knife, would be better than not having it. Plus, he still needed to continue tests on his first failure. The effect it had on a person that touched the edge of the blade was unexpected, to say the least. Harry was already wondering if he might be able to turn his failure into a success with some time and a few changes. November 9th? Excuse me, but what? Harry asked, and Penny grimaced in return. There was an attack. A young Gryffindor boy. Creevy, from what I hear. Penny informed, and Harry sat back at the Ravenclaw table in the Great Hall. There had been bits and pieces of the story flying around this morning, and it seems that now, at lunch, the news had finally broken. The heir had apparently unleashed Slytherin's monster on the school. So Hogwarts is going to close, right? Harry asked, and Penny outright frowned before she replied. Apparently not, though I don't know why. The staff hasn't mentioned closing the school or sending the students home. Penny replied, her pretty face twisted by her anger. You're kidding. Harry was shocked. A student had been attacked and petrified by an unknown assailant or monster, and Hogwarts was just going to carry on like nothing happened? What is wrong with these people? Penny could only shrug angrily while forcing herself to eat. I've narrowed down the list of potential magical snakes, but with petrification being the results of the attacks, I'm afraid this opens the door to other monsters being the culprit. Penny worried as she mentally went over her research. No magical snake I've read about has the ability to petrify its victims. I'm writing another letter to Sirius, Harry stated as he finished his lunch. The last reply I got, Sirius told me that it could just be a prankster with horribly bad taste, since it is right about the 50th anniversary of the last time the chamber was opened. But this is an outright attack. I'm sure Sirius will be able to round up the parents of the students and get the Aurors involved. Penny nodded and agreed to write her own letter to her parents. At the end of classes that day, Harry left with a quick goodbye to his study buddies. His only other comment was, I've got work to do. It so happened that on Wednesday, the 11th of November, the Great Hall doors were opened just as breakfast was finishing up. The staff were caught flat-footed by the appearance of the large group of witches and wizards, especially the large amount of Aurors present among them. A stern-looking woman with red hair and a monocle marched forward leading the group. Harry was quick to spot Sirius among the group, and Penny's father as well, though he'd only met the man briefly. Dumbledore, we need to talk, immediately. The stern witch in Auror robes informed the aged headmaster. Of course, Amelia, if you would all kindly follow me to the antechamber. Dumbledore agreed as he stood from his chair and led the large group through a door off to the side of the head table. The large group steadily made their way into the room until the Great Hall was only filled with students and the staff that weren't heads of house. Well, that worked better than I thought it would. Harry grinned and Penny gave him a side hug with a smile on her face. Later that day, Sirius got to meet with Harry, and Penny's father, Edward Clearwater, was with him since Penny was with Harry. The two adults explained what had gone on in the antechamber, besides a lot of yelling, and both Harry and Penny were less than thrilled with the results. What do you mean Hogwarts is staying open? Penny questioned incredulously. Dumbledore and Amelia argued back and forth about it for quite a while. Edward shook his head. But Dumbledore argued against closing the school, and Amelia forced him to accept Aurors being stationed at Hogwarts. Aurors might help, but wouldn't it be safer to just close the school? Harry questioned, and both Sirius and Edward looked like they agreed. Amelia only agreed to the school remaining open so that the Aurors can search every student's belongings for illegal magic items, especially ones that could petrify a person. If they find said item among a student's things, that student will be expelled on the spot and criminal charges will be filed, Sirius informed them. Now, this is still ridiculous. Harry grumbled, aggravated with the lack of sense being shown. We agree, but Dumbledore has a lot of influence in magical Britain. Edward groused as he pulled his daughter into a hug. Sirius was quick to do the same, while also passing Harry a small mirror. What's this? Harry questioned, looking the plain object over. One of the Marauder's best accomplishments. Sirius grinned proudly. A communication mirror. A what? Harry asked, and Sirius was happy to tell the story of how the pair of mirrors came to be. It seemed it was mostly Lupin's work with some minor inputs from Sirius and Harry's father, James. Why didn't you make more? Penny questioned as she looked the item over. Something like this could have made a fortune. Harry was also interested in the answer to Penny's question and looked at Sirius expectantly. Well, actually, Sirius rubbed the back of his head and sighed. It was complete luck that it worked at all. What's that mean? Harry inquired, and Sirius went on to explain that the Marauders had gone through well over 100 mirrors to eventually make the pair that worked. But even Remus didn't know why the pair worked out. They'd attempted to recreate the mirrors dozens of times, but even with the same enchantments and charms, no other pair ever worked out. I see, Penny replied as she stared at the mirror in her hands. A pity, it could have revolutionized magical communication. Do you think Mooney still has the notes for this? Harry asked, staring at the second mirror in his hands, with a near manic gleam of curiosity and interest in his eyes. They almost appeared to be glowing with how intensely Harry was staring at the mirror in his hands. Knowing Mooney, probably? Sirius nodded with a small shrug. He's a meticulous note-keeper. He probably still has them stashed away with his old school things. Can you ask him to send me a copy of them? Harry requested as he looked the mirror over. This sounds like a worthwhile challenge. The young artificer grinned as he had several thoughts and theories already flying around his head. Sure thing, Harry. Sirius laughed at the look on his godson's face. That gleam in his eyes was always followed by some kind of creation of Harry's, though even Sirius was curious if his godson could crack the mystery of the communication mirrors. Sirius took back one mirror and told Harry to keep the other in case of emergency. Should anything else happen, Harry was to contact Sirius with the mirror and inform him of it. If Sirius was called, he'd make sure to come to Hogwarts and retrieve Harry with all haste, regardless of whether or not Hogwarts was closing. Several minutes later, and the adults had left while Harry and Penny went to practice their wandless magic in the hidden workshop. Many students were rounded up and punished. When the Auror's search turned up items that were banned in the school, only 2 were dark items, from 2 seventh-year Slytherins, the rest mostly being alcohol like fire whiskey. Other than that, nothing else was uncovered, and classes resumed as normal for the most part. Aurors patrolled the halls at night instead of prefects, and the red-robed wizards and witches were stationed around the castle at strategic positions. There hadn't been another attack since Colin Creevey. The first year had been treated with a mandrake draft that had been brought in from St. Mungo's. When questioned about what he'd seen, the boy had only been able to recall seeing a large pair of yellow eyes through his camera, and then waking up in the hospital wing. Yellow eyes don't help narrow it down much. Penny groaned as she was looking through multiple tomes about magical creatures. A petrifying gaze was a rare trait even among the multitudes of magical beasts in the world. But Penny couldn't find any creature capable of living 1,000 years, or breeding successfully in isolation for the same length of time that also had said gaze. Maybe it's a hybrid? Harry mused as he was waiting for the circuit-based lines to cool on his second prototype knife. Slytherin doesn't come off as entirely sane to me from what I've read. That means it could be almost anything, though. Penny almost whined. Magical creature breeding can happen between species that have no relation to each other at all, as long as very specific conditions are met at least. Maybe we should ask Hagrid? Harry pondered. The gentle giant was a fount of knowledge when it came to magical creatures, after all. It couldn't hurt. Penny agreed as she watched Harry pick up his new knife. Just let me run a few tests with this first. Harry grinned as he produced a Lumos charm. A second later, and the Artificer swiped the blade of the knife through the ball of light. The light noticeably shrank and got dimmer, but still remained. Progress! Harry cheered as he looked at the light. Congratulations, Harry, Penny clapped for him. Let's try it again. How many swings until the Lumos charm is extinguished? Harry wondered as he passed the blade through the light again. This time, though, nothing changed about the charm. What? Harry asked, confused. He swiped through the light a few more times with no results. Why isn't it working? He muttered to himself before looking over the knife. Something wrong, Harry? Penny asked. What the hell? Harry shouted, and Penny started and almost fell out of her chair. What? What happened? Penny asked a second later as she tried to calm her heart rate. It's inert. Completely inert, Harry stated loudly, a look of confusion on his face. What do you mean? Penny asked as she stood from her chair and walked over to him. The knife, it's not magical anymore. It's just a chunk of an inert metal alloy in the shape of a knife, Harry replied as he showed her the prototype. Even to Penny's untrained eyes, the knife just looked dull, for lack of a better term. Well, what happened to it? Penny questioned curiously. Harry shook his head before he started looking over it more thoroughly. When it burned out. Harry spoke up a minute later. The array and the circuit-based lines, all of them are blackened. So it just broke? Penny asked and got a nod from Harry. That's basically it. Harry sighed heavily. The array was too much for the material. One use, and it burned out the Ulm. It didn't even disperse the Lumos charm, and it still burned out. But it weakened it. That's still progress, right? Penny encouraged, and Harry smiled at the blonde. Yeah, it's still progress. Just need a better magical metal as the base. What I wouldn't do for some orichalcum. But alchemists are very rarely willing to part with any they make. The stuff that's on the market costs way too much because of it. Not to mention the stories you hear about low-grade orichalcum. It's almost like fool's gold. It looks like what you want, but in the end, it's pretty much worthless. Harry sighed as he thought about it. Maybe take a break and work on something else, Penny suggested. You said the first prototype might have another use if you can work it out. Plus, that new trinket you've been working on seems interesting. Harry nodded as he turned to the first failed prototype, and the host of small metal discs that were strewn across another table in the workshop. Walking over, Harry looked through the papers on the discs, while Penny looked over the trinkets. With all the Aurors here, I got a few ideas to potentially make their jobs a bit easier, Harry admitted as he sat down and moved one of the discs in front of him. If I can work out the failed knife's array and give it a different form, I might have my first professional customer with the Auror department. What about the discs? Penny asked while looking at them and seeing the lines of runes on them. One-time use trinkets? They're meant to burn out as part of their activation, Harry remarked as he held the disc in front of him. I've basically put the runic form of about a dozen different dispelling charms on them. Place them on a warded object, like a door or building, and then activate them and they should, in theory anyway, break the ward. Though, to be honest, it might only be temporary for large-scale warded areas like family manors or the ministry. That would still be a great help to the Aurors, Harry. Penny praised the Artificer. A lot of times criminals are able to escape because they ward their hiding places, and the Aurors are forced to determine what wards are in place, and then they have to break them. The criminals usually have enough time to escape before the Aurors get past the wards. Yeah, I remember Tonks telling us about that. She's kind of the reason I want to make this stuff to begin with. I want to make her job easier, and if possible, I want her to be safer. Harry mused, his face set in a fond grin as he thought about the bubbly metamorph. Penny smiled at Harry for his thoughtfulness. Trust the young artificer to be thinking about those close to him when he decided to pursue a completely new topic of research. If you want, we can go see Hagrid later, Penny offered, and Harry shook his head. And now we should at least ask him about the hybrid possibility. If anyone at Hogwarts would know, it would probably be him. Harry nodded as he stood up and followed Penny out of the hidden workshop. The pair made their way through the castle and across the grounds unimpeded. Knocking on the door to the large wooden hut led to the barking of Fang, which Harry was used to from his occasional visits. "Fang, back! Back, you ruddy coward!" Hagrid hollered from inside, and the door opened to show the large hairy man. At Harry, "Penny, great to see you," Hagrid greeted as he smiled at the pair. Come in, come in. Bit chilly to be standing outside." The pair entered the warm, cozy hut and sat at the large table. Fang was quick to place his large head in Penny's lap and get his ears scratched by the blonde. "Hagrid, we were wondering about what Colin Creevey said about what he saw when he was petrified." Harry started, and Hagrid sat down with a kettle of tea prepared. "I've been looking into what Slytherin's monster could potentially be, but, as you no doubt know, a petrifying gaze is a very rare trait." Then Harry brought up the idea that the monster may be some kind of hybrid. "So we thought we'd come talk to you about the possibility since you know so much about magical creatures," Penny informed the giant man of the situation. "Oh, you two are going to make me blush." Hagrid smiled brightly at them for the praise to his knowledge. Well, it's true. Harry smiled at his large friend. "Any ideas on a potential hybrid that could have a petrifying gaze and still be some kind of magical snake?" That's a difficult question," Hagrid mumbled. "Breeding two different creatures together doesn't always result in what you might be wanting. Only a few creatures have a gaze like that. To cross it with a magical snake would be difficult." He mused with a thoughtful look on his face. One of the only magical snakes to have a magical ability related to its eyes is the basilisk, but a single look from them kills instead of petrifies. Could it be some kind of hybrid of a basilisk and another magical snake? Penny questioned, and Hagrid looked deep in thought. That'd be possible, but very difficult. Hagrid spoke while thinking. Slytherin was a parcel mouth, though. He could have potentially talked two different snakes into breeding. Basilisks are classified as Class 5 magical creatures. Wizard killers, aren't they? A single basilisk would be a horrifying monster to stash away. But how would this air keep it from killing them with a look, Harry wondered. A good question, Harry. Hagrid nodded. My pet Aragog was blamed for the death of poor Myrtle back when the chamber was last opened. But Aragog never hurt no one. Aragog? Penny questioned, and Harry was almost afraid to ask. My pet Acromantula. Misunderstood creatures they are. They're intelligent when raised by people. Hagrid explained, and both Harry and Penny paled. So they killed Aragog for the death of the student? Harry asked, and Hagrid shook his head. No, Aragog lives in the Forbidden Forest with his family, Hagrid informed them. He was so lonely that I got him a wife a few years later. Hagrid, Acromantulas are illegal to keep without a license, Penny stated, and Hagrid nodded. I don't keep them. They just live in the forest. As long as Aragog is alive, they won't leave the forest or hurt nobody. Hagrid assured, but that didn't make Harry or Penny feel any better. So we're still not sure what kind of beast Slytherin left in the chamber. Harry tried to get the conversation back on topic. Just that it can petrify with its gaze, has bright yellow eyes, and is possibly a hybrid of magical snake. None of which helps us identify it. There are just too many possibilities. Hagrid apologized while shaking his head. Penny and Harry stayed to chat with the groundskeeper for a while longer. They found out that Hagrid had been expelled the last time the chamber had been opened, and Aragog had indeed been blamed for the death of the student, Myrtle. "We should probably look into basilisks, just in case," Penny commented as she and Harry walked back up to the castle. "Agreed, it seems like this could be some hybrid or offshoot of a basilisk." Harry nodded as they entered the castle. "I'll need to keep working, even if it isn't much. It'll be better to have something than nothing if the monster finds us." "I'm sure the Aurors will be able to prevent more attacks, Harry. At least I hope so," Penny replied as she noticed the ones in the entryway. "What's this?" Harry questioned as he saw a large piece of parchment on the door of the Great Hall. Penny and Harry both read the parchment, and Harry groaned afterwards. "It's not the worst idea, Harry." Penny tried to comfort him. "It is if that peacock is the one attempting to teach or head it," Harry groused. The parchment was informing the student body of the upcoming dueling club that Professor Lockhart was going to start up in December. The absolute joke of a wizard, in Harry's opinion, was just going to use this to try and make a spectacle of himself. That much Harry knew already. But Penny seemed to want to at least sit in on it to look out for the younger students. "We'll just watch," Harry and Penny stated with a small smile. "Fine, but I already know that pompous windbag is going to be a joke." Harry sighed as he agreed to check out the dueling club when it started. "Well, then how about we get some more wandless practice in and really show them how to be prepared?" Penny questioned with a raised eyebrow. Harry distinctly felt like he was being challenged by his prefect friend. "Is that a challenge I hear in your tone, Prefect Clearwater?" Harry asked as he cocked his own eyebrow. Maybe it was. Maybe it was." Penny giggled as she and Harry made their way towards the hidden workshop to practice. "I've learned a new charm or two that should serve me well." Harry grinned as they walked along. "You don't say," Penny smiled. "So have I." "We'll see who is learning the best in a bit then," Harry chuckled. "Fair warning, my mana was at 4,890 yesterday morning." Penny smiled pleasantly. "Skill can triumph over power," Harry replied evenly. "She's at 4,890? I was at 1,610 this morning. How long will it take me to catch up?" He thought to himself as they made their way into the workshop again. Looking over at his work table and the various sheets of notes and runic sequences, Harry confirmed to himself that he was going to try and make the next push in his alchemy soon. "Ready yet, Harry?" Penny questioned as she stretched a bit to limber up for their duel. "Yeah, just give me a few moments to stretch," Harry replied as he tore his eyes away from his work table. The Sylvan is harder to transmute, but it's much more durable than Ulm. It has higher magic concentration as well, so maybe it can hold the array properly? He mused as he went through some stretches. "I'd like to have an actual prototype sword by the end of the school year, if possible." "Are you ready?" Penny asked as she raised her right hand. "Anytime, Penny." Harry replied with far more confidence than he felt about this duel. "You should work on your poker face, Harry." Penny laughed as she launched the first spell, a flipendo of the duel. "Noted," Harry replied as he smacked the flipendo aside and breathed out the large plume of smoke from the Fluctus Fumus spell, then brought up a protego to block Penny's next spell. At least his mana would probably increase a little after he ran himself ragged trying to keep up with Penny's much larger reserves. Current mana levels: Harry 1,610, Tonks 5,176, outdated. Penelope 4,890. Chapter 15. Dueling Club, more prototypes. This is so stupid. Harry sighed as he watched the blonde peacock make a spectacle of himself. "It's a bit much," Penny agreed as she watched Lockhart on top of the dueling platform. The defense professor was going on about his skills and accomplishments before having Professor Snape, of all people, join him on the platform for a demonstration. "A galleon says that Snape wins," Harry offered dully, and Penny turned her head slightly to look at him out of the corner of her eye. "Sucker's bet," Penny flatly replied, and Harry shrugged before they both refocused on the duel that was about to start. It was over in a single spell, Expelliarmus, from Snape. Lockhart lost his wand and was sent tumbling onto the platform. Harry rolled his eyes as the pompous blonde picked himself up and then tried to act like he'd let Snape disarm him. "Now, let's have our first student pair try dueling," Lockhart announced before he quickly locked on to Harry. "Mr. Potter, please come up to the platform." "Do I have to?" Harry muttered to Penny, who gave him a commiserating look before nudging him gently. "Fine," he huffed as he made his way up to the platform and took his place. Snape, for some reason, had chosen Draco to be Harry's opponent. The two second years met in the middle of the platform, as per tradition, to exchange a pre-duel dialogue, or in Harry's view, a traditional excuse for talking shite. "Scared Potter?" Draco asked with a self-assured smirk. "Bored, actually," Harry replied, and was mildly amused to see Draco's face turn red. The two then turned from each other and walked to their respective ends of the platform. "I'll count down from 3. When I get to 1, you may begin," Lockhart announced. though the man seemed to be enjoying the attention he was receiving more than he was paying attention to the duel. 3, 2, 1. Avertus Statum, Draco called, as he cast a wave of white magic towards Harry. The spell harmlessly splashed against the Protego that was suddenly in front of Harry. The young artificer looked the very picture of bored while everyone there, except for a few that had seen his wandless magic in person before, stared wide-eyed and with jaws dropped. Simple enough, Harry stated before Draco found his wand wrenched from his grip and flying into Harry's hand. I believe I win. Snape looked like he'd swallowed a lemon while everyone else just stared for a bit. It wasn't until Penny started clapping that the moment was broken and all the students, barring a few Slytherins, started to clap and cheer. But how? Draco muttered as he looked at his wand in Harry's hand. Wandless summoning charm, Harry informed the blonde before handing the wand back to the other boy. Harry was about to step off the platform when Penny stepped onto Draco's vacated spot. Penny? I kind of want to show off since you got to. Penny smiled and Harry nodded. Internally, the artificer was already grumbling, though. Penny wanted to show everyone a copy of their practice sessions, which usually involved a defeated Harry, sitting or lying on the floor trying to catch his breath. All the while, Penny would be only moderately winded and would have a grin on her face. I get the feeling this has an ulterior motive, Harry stated as the two met in the middle of the platform. Can't have you getting a big head now, can we? Penny smiled pleasantly as the two turned and made their way to the designated positions. Harry rolled his eyes with a sigh before turning to face Penny. Right then, 3, 2, 1. Lockhart counted down again, startled at losing control of the course of the club. Harry instantly fired off a flipendo at Penny, and the blonde only covered her hand in what looked like a localized Protego before she smacked the jinx away into the ceiling. Are you even trying? Penny asked with a flat look at Harry. The boy was given no time to respond before 4 fireballs materialized around Penny and were sent screaming down the platform towards him. Harry snapped into the full focus he'd developed in the many practice sessions he'd had with Penny and Tonks. Water formed around Harry, a wandless aguamenti charm, before rapidly swirling around into a thick wall in front of him. The fireballs snuffed out when they came in contact with the water, each releasing small gouts of steam. Harry lashed his conjured water forward like a whip towards Penny. The prefect smiled brightly, apparently glad to see he was taking this more seriously now, before using finite on the conjured water. Well, that wasn't nice. Harry snarked at her when his water vanished. Neither is this, Penny retorted as 6 fireballs materialized and went rocketing towards Harry. A Protego appeared in front of Harry, taking all 6 fireballs before being dispersed, and Harry grinned at Penny. He couldn't help but start getting into this a bit. It was so much like their regular practice sessions that he'd already tuned out the gawking crowd, though a small part of Harry's brain noted that Lockhart seemed to be the biggest gawker of them all. This straight platform is kind of ridiculous, traditional though it may be, Harry commented as he built up a spell. Dueling is an art as well as a dispute settler, Harry, Penny replied. It's not truly the same as a magical battle between spellcasters. True enough, I guess, Harry shrugged before inhaling deeply. Nobody in the Great Hall was expecting what Harry did next. It would actually be talked about for years to come at Hogwarts. The second year threw his head forward and exhaled a blast of fire not unlike a dragon towards Penny. Lockhart literally threw himself from the platform and landed in a heap on the stone floor of the hall. Penny, in contrast, appeared only slightly surprised before grinning and raising both her arms high above her head. The dueling platform cracked and a large section of it came up and turned 90 degrees to act as a shield for Penny. Careful, Harry, I might think you're actually trying to harm me, Penny playfully accused her friend. The fire died down quickly enough and Penny let the platform drop back into place. It was still charred and broken, of course, but it was at least back in the area it had come from. Says the girl that was lobbing fireballs at me not even a minute ago, Harry questioned. I thought you just wanted to play with fire. Try some of my new spellcraft, Harry. Penny grinned before swinging her right arm upwards towards the ceiling. A sudden powerful wind began to blow, and dust was picked up from the stone of the Great Hall floor. Students shrieked or yelled as their robes billowed about in the gale. Harry quickly saw the point of this particular spell. Did you just make a miniature pseudo-sandstorm? Harry exclaimed as he performed the impervious charm on his own face. Difficult to do, to be sure, but still possible if one understood the spell and how to apply it. I call it Sand Veils All. Do you like it? Penny asked through the wind and the dust. Wait a minute, are you saying this is an original spell? Harry asked in surprise. He didn't know Penny was that far into arithmancy. Yes, though it is based off of 2 other charms. Penny was grinning, though no one could actually see it through her spell. Very impressive, Penny. Harry praised her genuinely. Maybe you can teach me sometime. He questioned with a laugh of his own. If you're good. Penny teased, and Harry felt his eye twitch at the mothering tone. Catch! Catch? Harry repeated before he threw up 2 Protego shields at the same time, his eyes wide as small balls of compact sand pelted the double-layered shield. Did she just... You're truly amazing, Penny, Harry thought to himself as he analyzed what his friend had just done. Her Sandveil's All was a spell that could itself be used as a medium to cast other spells. That took not only great focus and considerable power, but the very ability to use it that way had to be worked into the original spell to begin with. You can't keep your Protego up forever, Harry, Penny chimed as she continued to pelt his shields with sand bullets. Stop, Harry exclaimed as he released the widest-ranged Immobilis charm he could. The sand in the air between him and Penny instantly froze in the air. Harry dropped his double Protego and slammed his hands together in a loud clap. All the static dust in the air was drawn into one point in space and began to pile up and compress. In less than 5 seconds, a large rock of compressed particulates was floating a few meters in front of Harry. Now you catch. He laughed as he launched the hefty stone at Penny. Sure. Penny smiled at the oncoming stone, before said stone stopped midair and then smashed into the ground. A small flame appeared above Penny's upturned palm and quickly grew into a beach ball-sized fireball. Are you trying to be some kind of elementalist, or just a pyromancer that dabbles in other spells? Harry teased the blonde as he conjured water again and had it flow before him in a whirling shield. I believe that's enough, Professor Flitwick intoned, vanishing both Penny's fireball and Harry's water shield with a simple flick of his wand. The two finally realized that the rest of the dueling club had backed away from the platform and were now closer to the walls of the Great Hall. Quickly coming to the understanding that they'd gotten a bit out of hand, the two apologized to their head of house. Sorry, Professor. Penny and Harry apologized as they gave short bows to their professor. Quite all right, students. Flitwick nodded back before beaming at the both of them. I must say, though, bravo Miss Clearwater and Mr. Potter! I haven't seen dueling like that in years. I've never seen it done wandlessly and silently as well, especially not when both participants haven't even graduated yet. Bravo, bravo, good show, both of you. The Charms Master applauded, and Penny and Harry both accepted his praise. It was saying a lot coming from such a respected professional duelist, after all. With a few flicks of his wand, Flitwick had repaired the dueling platform and seamlessly taken control of the dueling club. Lockhart had tried to interject, but all of the students had seen the man throw himself off the platform and land in an undignified heap. Platform-repaired Flitwick took over instruction of the club and set up pairs of students to practice with each other. Harry had to admit, with a competent instructor like Flitwick, the dueling club was actually interesting. As the students were waiting their turns to duel, Harry and Penny became the center of attention for many of their peers. Harry! Hermione called out as she stood before the two. You really can use wandless magic. I thought people were just exaggerating. That was awesome, Mandy cheered as she looked between her two housemates. I thought your original spell was amazing, Penny, Padma gushed to the prefect. It was fun, Luna smiled at them both, a look of excitement on her face. Thank you. Penny smiled at the younger girls. Harry nodded to them as well with a small smile. Can you teach me how to use wandless magic, Harry? Hermione asked, her eyes gleaming with the desire for new knowledge. Nobody seemed to notice the twitch on Penny's face when she heard Hermione ask that. Sorry, Hermione, Potter family secret, Harry replied as he held his hands up. What does that mean? Hermione inquired, looking genuinely confused. It means only members of the Potter family will be taught how to perform wandless magic, you dumb mudblood. Draco snarked at Hermione from outside of their group's little huddle. It didn't escape Harry's notice that the blonde was close enough to be able to overhear if Harry had actually started explaining it. Too bad for him that Harry's pronouncement of it as a family secret meant it would be seen as theft of magic in the eyes of the law. No magical house wanted to even be accused of that crime, much less actually charged or convicted. You'd be run out of the magical community faster than you could say Knox. Malfoy, get out of here, you bigoted ponce, Mandy yelled at the Slytherin. Draco scoffed at them all as he walked away and went to mingle with his own housemates. He's such a prat. Oh, wait, Hermione started, her face in its thinking look. If it's a Potter family secret, then why does Penny know how to do it? All of the girls turned to look at the prefect, and the older girl looked between all of them with a neutral expression. Because I taught her how. Harry spoke up, diverting all attention from Penny and onto him. I wanted to be able to teach it to any potential future children. Tonks and Penny wanted to learn, and they're my oldest friends, and they've both promised not to teach it to anyone. That's how they know. Are you two betrothed? Luna asked, innocently curious. Penny's and Harry's eyes went wide at the question. Mandy saw their reactions, and a teasing smile made its way onto her face. Well, Mandy, don't. Padma placed her hand on her friend's shoulder before she could speak. Padma was very familiar with Mandy's playful nature. "Aw, spoil sport?" Mandy pouted at Padma, but the Indian witch wouldn't be swayed. Oh my," Hermione uttered as she quickly put the pieces together. I see. To learn you have to be, or become, a member of the Potter family. Please forgive my rudeness, Harry." Hermione's face was a luminous red at the moment. "Hermione, it isn't like that," Harry tried to explain. Penny wasn't much help, as she was almost refusing to make eye contact with anyone at the moment. The rest of the first dueling club meeting passed with few comments. But there was a lot of knowing looks from Mandy, and Luna simply smiled serenely at Harry and Penny. If Luna wasn't such a sweetheart, Harry would almost think she was doing it on purpose. The next weekend? Okay, let's go down the list," Harry muttered to himself as he prepared to take his alchemy just a bit further. Silver, check. Powdered dragonbone, check. Iron, check. Cobalt, check. Powdered quartz, check. That's everything I need. It was time to try and transmute Sylvan. This alchemic metal was a step up from Ulm and a bit harder to make, not to mention the cost of using silver as a base material. But Sirius was all for supporting Harry's enchanting, and so a small fraction of the Black family fortune was set aside for Harry by his godfather. Harry vowed he'd make serious investment worth the man's while someday. Okay, second transmutation circle plate, set up. Now measure out the materials. I need 500 grams of each metal and 375 grams each of both powdered dragonbone and powdered quartz crystal. Harry was going to attempt multiple transmutations today in hopes of getting more samples of viable Sylvuin to try and forge with. After measuring out his ingredients, Harry placed the first set onto the transmutation circle plate and poured his mana into the alchemic array. The transmutation circle began to glow a bright blue as Harry's mana filled it. After a few seconds, the materials all began to glow and slowly merge together. Small sparks of magical discharge came from the materials as they were transmuted into a new, combined state. And when the process finished, Harry pulled his hands away from the plate. The newly transmuted metal was giving off small bits of light that floated about like dust particles. All in all, the process seemed to be the same as it was for Ulm, just with more material and a good amount more mana from Harry's end. At least 3 times more mana went into transmuting Sylvuin than Ulm. After the glowing of the metal stopped, Harry removed the silvery blue metal and looked it over. It had the color the book mentioned, so that was already a good sign. The true test would be its reaction to mana. Harry poured a bit of his mana into the ingot of, hopefully, Sylvuin, and kept it up for several seconds. The moment the metal glowed, making the bluish silver metal shine even more, Harry beamed at the success of his transmutation. "Yeah!" Harry cheered as he held up the ingot of Sylvuin. "I did it!" After he calmed down a minute later, he was very glad no one had been in the workshop with him to see that. It would have somehow found its way back to Tonks, and he'd be teased about it for who knows how long. Having had one success, the young artificer prepared to transmute the rest of his materials. After that, he would test out 2 different ideas with his next prototypes. It had become clear to Harry that circuit base wasn't going to cut it for the runic array he wanted his artifact sword to hold. So now he had 2 different paths to consider. One involved moving up the circuit formula and creating something both more powerful and much more expensive. Vitris Ari was a much better runic circuit material than circuit base. The only problem was making it and the cost of materials. Vitris Ari just so happened to have gold as its base material, so the cost was going to be high for a potential failure. His other idea was to use Ulm as the circuit material and use the magical metal's transference properties while leaving the actual handling of the runic array to the much stronger Sylvuin. Both had their own merits and, theoretically, both had a chance at success. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, Harry mused as he set about transmuting more Sylvuin ingots. He only had a few days left before he went back to Wood End Cottage for Yule break. He wanted to have the prototypes at least made, even if not tested before then. 7 more transmutations left Harry with 8 viable ingots of Sylvuin. He was happy that he hadn't messed any of them up, since you couldn't get the silver back from Sylvuin without a very specific form of alchemy that dealt with the breakdown and separation of magical compounds. Harry didn't have access to such specific and complex alchemy, so the simple fact he hadn't screwed up was a relief. Now to the forge. Harry thought aloud as he gathered up the ingots and moved into the smithy, getting the fire going. Harry waited until the heat was at the right temperature and placed the first ingot within the forge. Once the metal was a yellowish red, he used metal tongs to pull it out and take it over to his anvil. Harry poured his mana into the hammer with every swing. The ping of metal striking metal became the only sound in the hidden workshop for the next several hours. Harry would later be reprimanded for missing lunch and almost being late for dinner by Penny. After said prefect almost beat down the door to the workshop to get Harry's attention. The next day, "I'm just making sure you don't stay in here all day and miss meals," Penny informed Harry as she sat down at the study area of the hidden workshop. "I said it was an accident." Harry huffed as he pulled out his alchemy supplies. The 8 ingots of Sylvan had all been forged into knives, or the shape of knives at least, since none of them had an edge yet, and were waiting to be etched with runic arrays and circuit lines. Etching only took about an hour thanks to the alchemic rune Kit Tonks had gifted to him last Christmas. The etching tool was actually made of adamantite. There was no magical metal stronger in the entire world, so it easily etched other metals, including magical ones. Pulling his alchemy book closer, Harry went over the steps of making Vitris Auri again, and set about attempting to make the magical material. 100 grams of gold, 80 grams of powdered quartz, 20 grams of dried oogie grass stabilizer. Melt the gold first. Pour mana into the liquefied metal as you add the quartz and the stabilizer. Continue to supply mana as you stir the compound. After stirring for 3 minutes to even out the contents, then you transmute it with transmutation circle plate number 3. Harry spoke out the directions as he slowly performed them. Penny smiled fondly at him from where she was sitting and going over her homework. She'd bet that he didn't even realize he started speaking when he got wrapped up in his enchanting. She found it rather adorable, to be honest. The blue glow of the transmutation circle lit up part of the workshop for just under a minute, before Harry finished the final step of making Vitris Auri. The new circuit compound was still liquid in its vessel, and Harry left it on the magical equivalent of a Bunsen burner he'd found in a supply closet in an abandoned classroom to keep it warm. Filling his alchemic pen with the golden material, Harry carefully and precisely set about filling in the runic array and circuit lines of the first Sylvuan prototype. Almost 30 minutes later, Harry finished and emptied his alchemic pen of the remaining Vitris Auri. Now it was time to try his next idea. Harry still had some left over from his first prototypes, so he quickly set about getting it hot enough in the forge to liquefy it. He had to carefully watch the so that he didn't melt the magic out of the low-grade magical metal. Extracting it too late would leave him with inert metal that was useless to enchanting. Once he had the liquefied, he filled his alchemic pen and set to work filling in the runic array and circuit lines of the next Sylvuan knife. A half hour later, and Harry was sitting back and letting the cool and solidify into the knife. "Harry, it's time for lunch." Penny spoke up as she stood up from the table she was sitting at. "All right, I need a break anyway." Harry agreed, and the two left to the Great Hall to fill their stomachs. Luna sat with them at lunch and proceeded to tell them about Christmas at the Rookery, the Lovegood family ancestral home. Apparently, Luna lived near the Weasley family, and the two families often got together during the holidays. Harry thought the traditions of the magical world would be either normalish or completely odd. There didn't seem to be much in between in the magical world, but it seemed certain traditions were practiced by some families, while others weren't, and vice versa, depending on the family in question. It also seemed that the vast majority of students were heading home this year. Harry would bet money that it was because of the whole Heir of Slytherin investigation currently still in progress. As of now, there hadn't been another attack. Harry suspected that was because of the Auror presence within Hogwarts. It was hard to hide a monster moving through the school when all the portraits and ghosts, plus the Aurors, were watching as much of the school as possible. Hopefully this heir would wise up and just leave everyone alone or get caught soon. Harry wasn't particular about which. After lunch, Harry and Penny returned to the hidden workshop. Harry quickly set about testing his new prototypes. First up, the Vitris Auri and Sylvuan knife, Harry stated as he created a Lumos charm, a pass through the light with the blade, and the charm flickered and lost 2/3 of its size and brightness. "Yes! Progress!" Harry cheered, and Penny clapped for him from her table. "I better check the array." Harry thought aloud as he started inspecting the prototype. "Is it still working, Harry?" Penny asked a couple of minutes later. "It appears to be," Harry replied. "I didn't find any evidence of damage. Let's see how many swings it takes to snuff out an average Lumos charm." A ball of light appeared next to Harry, and he swung the prototype through the spell. The charm flickered and shrank to only 1/3 of its original size and brightness. A second pass through the charm dispersed it entirely. "Just a quick check," Harry mumbled to himself as he inspected the prototype for damage. A minute later saw Harry whooping with joy. "No damage. It works. It works." "Congratulations, Harry." Penny cheered for him as well. "I'll have to put it through some durability tests, see just how much it can take. But if it holds up, I'll try combining 2 of the base arrays into one functional array and applying it to the next Sylvuan prototype." The young artificer was practically glowing with glee at his progress. "What about the other prototype?" Penny asked, pointing at the Circuit Sylvuan knife. Right. Almost forgot in the excitement." Harry shook his head to refocus. "Let's test this one out." Another Lumos charm was conjured, and Harry passed the Circuit knife through the spell. The charm wavered when the blade was in contact with it, but it settled after the blade cleared the space. Neither size nor brightness had diminished. "It did something at least," Penny offered, and Harry looked over the array to check for any damage. Not seeing any after a few minutes, Harry stabbed the Lumos charm and watched it waver with the blade occupying the same space. Even as it wavered, the charm never went out, even after a solid minute of exposure to the prototype. How odd, Harry mused as he looked the knife over. The same runic array, but different materials have gotten different reactions. Fascinating. The Artificer was smiling just as brightly as when his other prototype had succeeded. Penny could only smile fondly at Harry. Even when his work didn't quite work, he still found it interesting and was left with more things to try out and test. He didn't let failure stop him. In fact, it seemed to spur him on, like he was taking it as a challenge. She had to admit, that work ethic was rather attractive. No, so what now? Penny asked, breaking Harry from his staring at the prototype. Harry thought about it for a moment, and his eyes fell onto his prototype knife that had failed. But the knife did have the interesting effect of leaving his fingers with the pins and needles feeling when they were tapped by the edge of the blade. I'm going to test something else. Harry grinned as he brought the edge of the circuit knife to his left pinky finger. He tapped the digit with the blade and instantly lost feeling in the finger. Interesting. He grinned as he looked between his finger and the prototype. What did you do, Harry? Penny questioned him, and Harry turned to her with a smile. I believe I've just temporarily removed feeling from my left pinky, Harry informed the prefect. He did not expect her to suddenly be at his side, and looking over the digit with a critical eye. What do you mean, removed feeling? Penny demanded as she tried to find anything wrong with the finger. Nothing serious, Penny. I just can't feel it right now. Harry tried to placate the older girl, but she just looked at him incredulously. You might have just magically severed your nerves. Penny raised her voice to express her worry for him. This could be very serious. We're going to the hospital wing. I'm sure it'll wear off in. Harry tried to say, but Penny was having none of it. She latched her hand around his left wrist and proceeded to drag him out of the hidden workshop. We're going, and that's final, Penny stated with finality, as Harry stopped resisting and let her lead him along. He supposed it was nice knowing how much Penny cared about him, but he also didn't much care for having the school Medowitch, Madame Pumphrey, fussing over him as she was wont to do for the students. Oh well, if it helped Penny stop worrying, he'd go. There wasn't much he wouldn't do for her and Tonks if it helped them out, now that he thought about it. It's good to have such great friends, Harry thought to himself as he followed along with Penny. Though I hope she releases the death grip on my wrist soon, since I'm coming along willingly. She didn't. Chapter 16. You'll Break the Two Knives. Harry and Penny sat together in a compartment on the Hogwarts Express as it headed back towards London. Both were looking forward to seeing their families and celebrating the holidays. Harry had brought along both of his prototypes for further testing, but at the moment he was thinking back onto his forced trip to the hospital wing via Penny. Flashback, hospital wing, what seems to be the problem? Madame Pumphrey asked as Penny led Harry, by the wrist she still had a death grip on, into the hospital wing. Harry can't feel his left pinky, Madame Pumphrey, Penny told the Medowitch. I'm worried he might have some damage to his nerves. Sit down, Mr. Potter, and let me see your left hand, Pumphrey requested as Harry followed along and sat down before offering his hand. The Medowitch ran her wand over his hand a few times, and then cast a few diagnostic charms on his finger directly. How odd, she commented as she tapped his pinky a few times with her wand. What's odd? Harry asked, and the Medowitch looked at him for a moment with questioning eyes. There is no magic in your pinky right now, Mr. Potter, Pumphrey informed the two students. It's the reason you can't feel it or move it. She tutted while she went over to her potions cabinet and brought back a small vial of transparent blue fluid. Magic is a part of a witch or wizard. Without it, our bodies don't function properly. This is usually displayed in the form of magical exhaustion, symptoms of which are lethargy, loss of coordination, and in severe cases, loss of feeling in the extremities, followed by unconsciousness. So he gave his pinky severe magical exhaustion? Penny questioned, a look of confusion on her face. Interesting. Harry mused as Pumphrey covered his finger in the potion by soaking a cotton ball and then dabbing it on his pinky. You could have permanently injured yourself for all you knew, Harry. That's not what I would call interesting. Penny huffed at him, and Harry looked back at her with a smile. I disagree, though in future I'll make sure not to directly test on myself. Harry promised his friend, and Penny gave him a nod of acceptance. Magical exhaustion wears off over time as the witch or wizard rests. So this injury wouldn't have persisted, Pumphrey informed them before turning a sharp-eyed look on Harry. Don't do this to yourself again, Mr. Potter. I don't want to see you and hear from your own hard-headedness. Yes, Madame Pumphrey, Harry replied, as he started to get feeling back in his pinky. It seemed the potion she'd rubbed onto his finger had worked. End flashback. Hey, Penny, Harry spoke up as he formed a lumos on the tip of his index finger. What's up, Harry? Penny looked up from her book, seeing the charm on his fingertip. Catch! Harry grinned as he flicked his finger forward, and the Lumos charm traveled across the short space. Penny smiled as she caught the spell on her own index finger. With a grin, the Lumos charm turned blue and was flicked back at him. "Back at you, Harry," Penny grinned. Harry caught the charm next and turned the color to green before tossing it back. The two spent the next hour playing around like this, changing the Lumos charm's color with each pass, and eventually a second Lumos charm was added and then a third. Near the end of their impromptu game, they were juggling 8 charms between them, all different colors. Needless to say, this was a rather fun trip for the two of them. Platform 9 3/4. Harry and Penny were just exiting the Hogwarts Express when they and everyone else on the platform noticed one person that stood out quite a lot. Harry, over here! Welcome back!" Sirius yelled from the platform. Harry facepalmed at what his godfather was doing and wearing. "Well, someone is feeling the spirit of the season." Penny giggled as Harry rolled his eyes, though a small smile was on his face. "I feel like I should have seen this coming." Harry trailed off with a sigh as everyone on the platform looked at his godfather. Sirius was wearing robes in Christmas colors, red and green, a large hat with a Christmas tree on it that twinkled with actual lights, and was holding up a sign that read, "Welcome back, Harry," in bright red and green. "Really, Sirius?" The teen sighed as he and Penny made their way over to the loud, brightly dressed man. "Hi, Harry, welcome back." Sirius laughed loudly, and Harry just huffed before letting his godfather pull him into a hug. "I missed you too, Sirius," Harry playfully grumbled with an overly dramatic eye roll for effect. Sirius only laughed more before releasing his godson. "Good to see you again, Penny." Sirius greeted the blonde with a smile. "Nice to see too, Sirius." Penny returned the greeting. Sirius had insisted she call him by his name rather than Mr. Black. According to Sirius, it made him feel old. "We'll be seeing you for Christmas, yes?" Sirius asked, and Penny nodded. "Yes, for a while at least. We always go to Christmas dinner at my grandparents' home. The whole Clearwater family, magic and mundane, get together every year for it." Penny informed, and Sirius smiled in response. That was the kind of family he always wished he'd had growing up. "Then we'll be seeing you for presents." Sirius chuckled, which Penny smiled at. After farewells had been exchanged, Penny headed over to her parents, while Sirius and Harry moved off to the side. Sirius then side-along apparated Harry back to Wood End Cottage. At Christmas morning, "Harry, wake up! It's Christmas!" Sirius yelled loudly as he burst into Harry's room, badly startling the boy in question. "Sirius!" Harry yelled groggily. "Don't do that!" The boy put on his glasses as he climbed out of his warm bed. "But it's Christmas, Harry. That means presents. The Tonks will be here soon, too." Sirius beamed as he tousled Harry's bedhead and then dashed from the room. "How is a grown man more excited about Christmas than me?" Harry wondered as he stretched and yawned, before heading down towards the living room and kitchen. Having a nice breakfast thanks to Taylor, Harry felt far more awake and sat next to Sirius on the couch, looking at the presents under the tree. It wasn't too long afterwards that a knock came from the door. Sirius got up to answer it, and the Tonks came inside a few moments later. "Hey, watch her, Harry!" Tonks cheered as she pulled him into a hug. "Hey, Tonks." Harry smiled as he returned the bubbly metamorph's hug. "You ready for presents?" Tonks asked with a grin. "Yes, though I think Sirius is far more excited than me." Harry teased, only to be completely ignored by Sirius, who was already sat next to the presents and ready to start passing them out. Not surprising. Andromeda laughed as she told Sirius to wait for a bit longer. He's always been a child at heart. "Oi!" Sirius exclaimed, making Andromeda and Ted laugh. It wasn't too much longer before the group was joined by Penny, who arrived via the Floo, and shortly after her Remus had joined them the same way. It was with much cheer that the group started to exchange gifts, with Sirius happily passing out presents from beneath the tree. Remus had gotten Harry multiple books on runes and enchanting, as well as a few of his own recommendations about magical creatures. Harry had happily thanked the worn man as he looked through some of them. Sirius had gifted him a journeyman alchemist kit, which Harry had stared at for a good long moment, before practically tackling Sirius with a hug. Andromeda and Ted had been all smiles as they handed over their gift to him. Harry understood why as soon as he removed the wrapping paper and saw what it was. "It's brilliant." Harry smiled as he looked at the framed photo of his parents and a young infant Harry. The sight of his parents fawning over his infant self was all the proof anyone would ever need to know how much love Lily and James had for their son. The next gift was from Penny. It was a hand-knitted scarf in Ravenclaw colors that almost matched the one he'd made for her last year. Harry smiled as he wrapped it around his neck and thanked Penny for it. A playful, "I guess this makes us even," brought laughter to the group while Penny playfully rolled her eyes at Harry. "Mine next." Tonks grinned as her gift was handed to Harry. He tore off the paper and then opened the box to find a book, rather old, on broom crafting. Harry pulled the old book out of the box and looked it over. "I remember you said you wanted to figure out how brooms worked. When I saw that book at the second-hand store in Diagon, I figured you'd like it. A lot of those kinds of books aren't published anymore because the big broom companies have argued against them in the Wizengamot. But they can't get rid of all the ones already published. This is great, Tonks, Harry smiled happily. He'd been having a devil of a time trying to find a book on the subject through Owl Order. He was 100% sure that the broom-making companies had put protections onto their finished brooms to protect their secrets. That was the only reason he hadn't bought a broom or two and tried taking them apart already. Now that Harry, the youngest, had opened his presents, the rest of the group started to open theirs. Andromeda rolled her eyes at Sirius when her gift from him turned out to be sexy robes for her to wear for Ted. Sirius had laughed good-naturedly and even gotten a thumbs up from Ted in secret. A second gift from both Remus and Sirius had her give them genuine thanks, as it was a lovely traveling cloak with charms to keep her warm, cool, dry, and to keep it from getting dirty. Ted had received a specially made wizard's chess set that had the playing styles of several experts saved into it, so he could play even without a partner. The man had thanked both Remus and Sirius with a grin. This would certainly make slow days at the office more enjoyable. Remus had gotten new robes from Andromeda, and Ted, seeing as most of the man's clothes were all a bit worn. Remus had thanked them, and Sirius had given him his gift next. The gift exploded confetti into Remus's face when he opened the box, and Sirius laughed loudly. The prank war begins again, Moony. Sirius laughed, and Remus gave a tired shake of the head at his friend before pulling out the real gift at the bottom of the box. It was a 500-galleon gift certificate to an apothecary that specialized in brewing and selling rare and difficult potions. Remus's eyes widened at the amount, but as soon as he tried to open his mouth, Sirius was already shaking his head. Non-refundable, Moony. You have to use it. Remus gave Sirius a nod and a smile filled with gratitude, unbeknownst to Harry, Penny, and even Tonks. This certificate would pay for Remus's Wolfsbane potion for a few years straight. Penny was gifted a magical bookmark from Tonks. It could be separated into 10 pieces and used to mark places in different books that related to each other. The bookmark could then color-code itself based on the owner's desires. From Harry, she received a book on career spellcraft, a tome that Harry had ordered after seeing that Penny was already capable of creating her own spells. It was filled with the basics of multiple branches of magic and how spells were often constructed and used for them. Everything from transfiguration to healing was covered in the book for any up-and-coming spellcrafter. Tonks had happily opened her gifts and smiled at Sirius and Remus when she pulled out a color-changing outfit. It was a set of shirt, pants, and shoes that would change color at the wearer's desire. This particular set was even the pricier version that could do multiple colors at the same time. With Tonks being Tonks, it was almost instantly tie-dye, and Andromeda just shook her head at her daughter's antics. From Penny, she was gifted a charmed bracelet that could be used to detect other charmed objects. These little trinkets were most often used to find lost items or to check if an object had magic cast on it. They were good for avoiding pranks, but could also warn of more malicious curses as well, so long as said curses weren't hidden from such detection. Unfortunately, they tended to wear out after a year at best. Tonks had put it on immediately while thanking Penny. Then she stared right at Sirius, with a smug grin making the marauder sulk about her cheating. "I hope you like it, Tonks." Harry smiled as he handed her his gift. Tonks smiled as she removed the wrapping paper and opened the box. Pulling out what was inside revealed a set of trinkets. Tonks looked them over, and Harry explained the function of the first one, since Tonks had never seen it. It was a silent step for her boots, so her footsteps wouldn't make noise. The next trinket was a hiding stone for whatever she wanted to use it for. Finally, a test frame for her own personal use. "Thank you, Harry." Tonks beamed at him as she pulled him into a hug. Harry returned the embrace with a grin, and then Sirius finally opened his own gifts. From Ted and Andromeda, a nice set of robes for when he had to be Lord Black. Thankfully, they were much less stuffy than more traditional formal robes. Sirius was pleased with the more modern Muggle cut, rather than the older styles that most lords wore at formal events. From Remus, a set of all of Zonko's newest products, since Sirius hadn't had much time to catch up on the pranking scene after coming out of his coma. The fact that the box was stuck to his hands made the dog Animagus squawk at Remus indignantly. "You're the one that restarted the prank war, Padfoot." Remus smiled pleasantly before Andromeda canceled the sticking charm with her wand. Sirius's gift from Tonks was a set of tickets good for any one professional Quidditch match of the 1993 season. Sirius, a Quidditch fan since he was a boy, had hugged his surrogate niece and was already making plans to catch a summer game with Harry right after Hogwarts let out. "Here, Sirius, this is from me." Harry smiled and Sirius happily opened his godson's gift. It was a small book, but the title made Sirius realize he'd been pranked. How to Woo a Witch, That's Way Out of Your League, had Remus, Ted, Tonks, and Harry outright laughing. Penny and Andromeda kept their laughter to giggles, but everyone was amused, knowing that Sirius and Marley Reed had been dating for a bit now. "Ha ha ha, very funny, you." Sirius fake laughed before breaking into a grin at his godson. Not too bad there, Harry. We'll make a proper marauder out of you yet. Look in the bottom, Sirius. Harry instructed, and when Sirius pulled out what was in the bottom, he couldn't help the fond smile that appeared on his face. It was a picture of him and Harry standing outside of Wood End Cottage. They'd had it taken the past summer. Under the picture was emblazoned the words, "Home is where the heart is." Thank you, Harry. Sirius pulled his godson into a hug, and the two held each other for a bit before Sirius pulled back. I'll definitely have to get a frame for this. I'm putting it on the mantle. Harry could only smile at how happy Sirius looked right now, surrounded by friends and family. From there, the day progressed with a light lunch and festive games. Tonks and Penny disappeared for a bit, much to the blonde's confusion as Tonks practically dragged her away. Harry was enjoying looking through some of his new books when Tonks called him upstairs for a bit. Thinking nothing of it, Harry ascended the stairs and only stopped when he realized that he was about to open the same door that he'd been surprised with on his birthday. No way she'd be able to trick Penny again, right? Harry mumbled to himself before he shook his head and opened the door. What he saw was not a topless set of young women, but something equally nice. Tonks and Penny were in sexy Santa outfits that showed off their midriffs, legs, and some cleavage. Penny was a bit pink in the cheeks, but looked fine with the outfit. The brown-eyed blonde was a full head taller than Harry. Her hair reached a bit past her shoulders, and thanks to her current outfit, Harry was able to see her figure very well. The swell of her breasts, unknown to Harry, marked her as a healthy C-cup. Her trim waist flared out to wide hips that gave her a slight hourglass figure. Combine that with her long legs, and Harry could only think that Penny was a very beautiful girl. Tonks had shamelessly increased her bust size, so that her own outfit revealed far more cleavage than normal. The Santa hats on their heads completed the look. "Surprise, Harry!" Tonks announced with a grin. Harry just stood there, taking in the lovely sight for a bit. "How did I let you talk me into this?" Penny questioned, and Tonks pulled her into a sideways hug with a smile. "Because you want to show off for Harry?" Tonks teased the younger girl. That's not it," Penny denied, though the glance she threw Harry's way might have brought her denial into question. "Really?" Tonks laughed as she turned both of them around so that Harry could see them from the back. His eyes were drawn to the short skirts covering their bums, before Tonks playfully flipped both her skirt as well as Penny's. "Oh," Harry uttered out as he found out that the outfits apparently came with underwear, too. Panties with horizontal green and red stripes filled his vision for a moment, before Penny quickly forced her skirt back down. The blonde's face was now bright red as she slapped at Tonks with a whine about Harry being too young again. "Hope you enjoyed your special present, Harry." Tonks laughed as she fended off Penny's embarrassed slaps. "Give us a bit to change again, and we'll be right down." Harry nodded, his own cheeks a bit red, with a small happy smile on his face as he closed the door behind him. Tonks and Penny have nice bums, Harry thought to himself before shaking his head. It'd be best to get his face back to normal before being seen by Sirius again. His godfather could spot a successful prank, with just a glance after all. It wasn't long after that when Harry pulled out his prototypes to show to Sirius, Remus, Ted, and Andromeda. They were all impressed with the Vitris Ari and Sylvain Knife's ability to weaken and dispel the charms Harry produced. Pulling a bit of a prank, Harry demonstrated the Ulm Circuit Knife's ability by tapping Sirius on the shoulder with it. After the initial surprise at not being able to feel or move his left arm was over, Sirius had laughed and flopped his arm around in amusement. What an odd effect. Remus commented, and Harry agreed with him, explaining that it was the same runic array just made with different materials. Their talk was interrupted when Sirius swung his unfeeling left arm into Remus's back with a very fake "sorry, Mooney, can't seem to control my arm," which had led to Remus pulling out his wand and sticking the offending limb to Sirius's side with a sticking charm. This Ulm Circuit one could be pretty useful for the Aurors, Harry, Tonks mused as she held the prototype. If you could make it a different shape and it still worked, the Ministry might want to purchase some for the Aurors to use. We can't exactly be swinging around knives at people, you know? Not a bad idea. Harry trailed off as he thought upon the implications of his prototype. A weapon that would allow Aurors to render a criminal witch or wizard immobile for several minutes would indeed be useful. The fact that it couldn't be reversed with something like an Enervate charm or a Finite charm would make it better than a Stunning spell or Immobilis charm, too. At the very least, Madame Bones might be interested in looking at them. Tonks shrugged. It would make on-scene questioning of suspects easier if they could still talk, but couldn't move their arms and legs. "I'll look into altering its form when I get back to Hogwarts, Tonks. Thanks for the idea." Harry smiled at the metamorph, who was showing her festive spirit with red and green striped hair. "No problem, Harry. I kind of want one of these already." Tonks chuckled as she watched Sirius unstick his left arm and swing the floppy limb at Remus again. "Certainly not for pranks, I'd hope." Andromeda looked at her daughter, who only smiled innocently. "What are we going to do with you, Nymphadora?" "Not call me that?" Tonks grumbled at the use of her first name. Ted could only smile as his wife and his daughter got into another debate about Nymphadora's name. Penny had to leave at around 3 in the afternoon to go with her parents to the Clearwater family Christmas dinner. So with goodbyes, as well as hugs from Tonks and Harry, Penny left via the Flu for the day. Remus tried to leave shortly after their own Christmas dinner, but Sirius had practically forced him to stay the night. The Tonks had left around 9 that night with another round of goodbyes and hugs. Tonks even kissed Harry's cheek with a smile and a wink. Harry would be teased again by Sirius for the rest of the night before bed about it, too. All in all, Harry found he very much enjoyed his first family Christmas. The Dursleys had never neglected him, but the cheer of the season was rather absent between them and Harry. This was the first family Christmas where the full spirit of the season was everywhere for Harry, and he was a part of it, wholly and completely. It was no surprise that Harry fell asleep that night with a happy smile on his face. Chapter 17. Back to Hogwarts? Valentine's Day? So nothing has happened during Yule break? Harry questioned, and Penny shook her head. Nothing at all, or at least that's what the professors have told to us prefects. Penny replied as they sat at the Ravenclaw table, with Luna to Penny's left and Harry to her right. So did the culprit go home for the Yule break? Harry wondered as he ate. Christmas should be spent with family. Luna smiled at them both as she shaped her mashed potatoes into a vaguely castle-like form. Indeed it should, Luna. Penny smiled at her fellow blonde. Not sure if the culprit cares much. Harry shrugged. Even mean people like Christmas, right? Luna asked, and Harry instantly glanced at Snape in response. The potions professor was scowling, as always, so there was a fairly good chance he didn't care for the holidays. Maybe not all of them. Harry responded with a shrug as he went back to his dinner. The next day after classes, Harry returned to his hidden workshop to experiment with altering the Ulm circuit knife's form. He carefully went through the runic sequences of the array, looking for anything that might have to be changed. Several minutes later, he came to the 2 parts of the array that he'd have to change if he wanted this idea to work. The severance sequence and the cut prevention sequence would both have to be substituted out for other runic sequences to have any chance of working with a different form. What sequence would work, though? Harry murmured to himself as he went through a few of his books. Not much progress was made on his first full day back at Hogwarts. The weekend proved to be rather fruitful for Harry. He'd found a runic sequence that might work with his new idea. The block sequence was used to keep a designated person, item, or other magically recognized thing from moving past a certain point. While it was often used in warding, nothing about the sequence suggested that it couldn't be used on something mobile. It wasn't a static sequence like his rune safe was. Now he just had to find a new runic sequence that would be able to make use of the block sequence. Thankfully, that only took him until Sunday evening. A rather obscure sequence used to transfer effects with contact. Harry would have to rewrite it and then try to integrate it together with the block sequence and his own runic designation for mana. If this worked out, he should theoretically be able to change the form of his Ulm circuit knife to something a bit more in line with police work. During Harry's research for his new idea, Penny was still looking into what Slytherin's monster could be. She brought up a potential idea to Harry during the last week of January. It might have been a cockatrice, Penny suggested as she showed Harry some of her newest notes. When a cockatrice gets old enough, they can develop a petrifying gaze of their own. That fits with what happened to Mrs. Norris and Creevy. Plus, cockatrices do have snake tails. So magically speaking, they might have enough of a relationship to other magical snakes to make crossbreeding easier. That still doesn't bode well for anybody in the castle. Harry grimaced. A cockatrice was a deadly magical beast after all. They were currently rated at XXX by the Ministry of Magic. If they were old enough to have gained a petrifying gaze, then they moved up to XSXXX classification. Crossbreeding one with a different magical snake didn't make them less harmful by any means. It doesn't, but it could give us a way to deal with the petrification problem, Penny replied, happy that she'd found some kind of useful lead. Better than being caught unaware. Harry agreed as he looked over his notes for the Ulm circuit array. He was still trying to rewrite the transfer sequence to work how he wanted it to. So far, he'd done 7 different rewrites, and none of them had worked out. The transfer sequence was very finicky, for lack of a better term. It had very little mutability in its structure before its purpose was lost. With a sigh, Harry set about rewriting it again to try and get it to integrate with the block sequence and his runic designation for mana. And then first week of February. I think it works. Harry breathed out happily as he looked over his latest rewrite. The new version of the transfer sequence finally fit with the block sequence. His runic designation for mana also fit with the block sequence, and should finally be the thing that was blocked when the transfer sequence was used. The newly rewritten sequence made it so that physical contact had to take place, and it could only transfer to something magical. But these 2 limitations worked out just fine. for what Harry wanted the item in question to do. After all, witches and wizards were magical, so the array should work out just fine. Now I just have to test it. Harry exhaled as he went to the smithy to start making the prototype of his new Ulm circuit design. Harry was hopeful to get this done by April and have a working item. It would make a great birthday gift for Tonks. Plus, if she could demonstrate the item's uses and usefulness to the Aurors, he might just be able to make a lucrative sale. If his items proved useful in the hands of the British Aurors, then he could potentially use that success as a means to market his items to other magical police forces across the world, too. Friday, February 12th. He can't be serious. Harry groaned as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Maybe it won't be that bad. Penny tried to reassure him, but even she looked unconvinced. What were they lamenting about? Lockhart had just announced that he was going to be throwing a large morale-boosting Valentine's Day for the castle. The man even said that he was hiring Cupids to deliver Valentine's Day poems for the students if they wanted to submit one. This weekend was going to be a nightmare. Luckily, Valentine's Day fell on a Sunday this year so that classes wouldn't be interrupted at least. Sunday, February 14th. I've got a musical message to deliver to Harry Potter in person. A rough male voice behind Harry stated, as he was almost to the Great Hall. He'd been safely secure, hiding in his workshop for most of the day. Unfortunately, Penny would be cross with him if he skipped meals, so he'd had to leave his sanctuary. I'll give you 20 galleons right now to not do what you're about to do. Harry offered to the Cupid behind him as he turned to face the person, although the person actually turned out to be a dwarf. About 1.5 meters tall, stocky, and with a prominent beard. Harry had read about them a little bit when he was familiarizing himself with the magical world in first year. They weren't mentioned much and seemed to exist on the very fringes of magical society. There was mention that they were excellent blacksmiths, as well as jewelers, and that they lived in mountains mostly. They were also often described as blunt and stubborn. Show me the gold first, the dwarf demanded, and Harry, eager to avoid the inevitable embarrassment, fished into his pocket and pulled out a magical pouch. These were commonly sold in Diagon Alley and were a lesser version of the moleskin pouch Harry had sitting in his rune safe. Opening the pouch, Harry quickly pulled out 20 of the golden coins and showed them to the dwarf. We have a deal. The dwarf nodded as he tore up the poem in his hands and then held his right hand out for payment. Harry handed the stack of coins over to the dwarf and watched him place them into his own pouch. Have a nice day. With that, the dwarf turned to walk away, but Harry's curiosity got the better of him. Sir Dwarf, if it's not a bother, could I ask a few questions? Harry inquired, and the dwarf turned to look at him. Make it quick. I still have a few more of these things to deliver before I can get out of this costume. The dwarf grumbled, clearly not a fan of the Cupid outfit Lockhart forced them to wear. Right, since you already know my name, might I ask yours? Harry wanted to make some form of introduction. Drad Erden, the now-named Drad replied brusquely. Thank you, Mr. Erden, Harry thanked the dwarf. The Mr. is unnecessary. Drad shook his head. Beg your pardon, Harry asked, confused. Erden is proper address by dwarven standards, Drad informed him. Mr. and Mrs. are human forms of address. Dwarves are not overly much for excess formalities. Ah, I see. Thank you for the information, Erden. Harry nodded to the dwarf. It is fine, lad. Drad waved it off. Anything you actually wanted to ask, or can I be on my way? Just a question or two. I won't keep you long. Harry stated before he asked his first question. Why do this job when you clearly hate it? Not much choice, lad. Dwarves can barely get any work in the magical world these days. We take whatever we can get to keep our families fed. Drad replied, a grimace on his face. I read up on what was available about dwarves when I was familiarizing myself with the magical world last year. I did notice a rather lacking amount of information on the dwarves. Harry remarked, and he saw Drad's eyes narrow in response. I suppose that is your next question? Drad asked for clarification. If it isn't an imposition, of course. Harry nodded. Feel free not to answer if you don't want to. The dwarves have been pushed to the very edge of the magical world, especially in Europe, our own native lands. It started almost 1,000 years ago, and now we have been reduced to this. Drad grumbled as he motioned to the Cupid outfit he was wearing. Just so that we can eke out a living. How did that happen? The books don't say anything about that. They only mention that the dwarves were excellent blacksmiths, jewelers, and that they lived in mountains. Those were the days. Drad exhaled deeply. My people were driven from our mountain halls, all because the wizards of the past wanted their fighting with the goblins to end. The dwarf snorted at this. Lot of good that did them. Rebellions have happened throughout the ages since. Wizard and witches pushed the dwarves out? Harry questioned in shock. They don't mention that in their books, do they? Drad huffed as he shook his head, his beard swaying slightly. 1,000 years ago, Gringotts had a different name, Baraz Irkul, before we were driven out and the goblins took it over with their filthy, grubby claws. Oh, that's disgusting. Harry grimaced at what had been done to the dwarves. No wonder there was barely anything on them. They'd almost been wiped from magical history in the last 1,000 years. All for what appeared to amount to a failed treaty with the goblins, of all things. We don't blame the wizards and witches of today for the actions of their ancestors, Drad informed him. We do hold the goblins in contempt, but that has more to do with our long-standing feud with them for what they took from us. What happened to your mountain halls? Harry questioned, and Drad sighed despondently. The mountain is gone. All the magic harvested out when the mountain was mined to almost nothing in a few short generations. When the magic was gone, it was sold to some mundane king for profit. I believe it's been built over entirely now with a mundane city, but I couldn't tell you the name of the place, and Drad muttered out. Even their mountain is gone now, Harry thought with pity. How long had these dwarves been stuck, holed up wherever they could find space, barely keeping themselves afloat as the ages passed? I'm sorry to hear that, Erdun. Harry offered his sympathies. I don't suppose there's much I can do to help, though. That's all right, lad. We dwarves will endure. We're a hardy people. One day we'll get back what was taken from us. Drad replied as he clenched his fist. Don't suppose it'll help much. But if you happen to find the Sword of Gryffindor in your years here, send it to my father, King Dressard Erdun, if you could. What would you want the Sword of Gryffindor for? Harry questioned. You don't really believe that goblins forged such a powerful weapon for a wizard, do you? Drad asked, and Harry remembered questioning that very fact when he'd been reading up on magical swords. Thus that sword was forged by dwarven smiths, my ancestors at that. Only a direct descendant of Gryffindor or a descendant of Erdun can truly claim that sword and reveal its true power. I'll keep my eye out for it, then. Harry agreed, as he now had much more to think about. Thank you for speaking with me, Erdun. It was good to meet a wizard that's willing to listen, Drad replied as he turned and headed off. Harry was left with his thoughts and the revelation that a chunk of magical history had basically been covered up by guilty wizards in the past. At least I'm not the only one that doesn't trust the goblins, Harry mumbled to himself quietly as he made his way into the Great Hall. Happy Valentine's Day, Harry. Penny smiled at him as she handed him a few choice bars of various Honeydukes chocolate. Happy Valentine's Day, Penny. Harry smiled back as he handed her an assortment of Honeydukes' finest, some of the most expensive chocolates that Honeydukes produced. He'd sent a similar gift to Tonks last night with Hedwig. As if thinking about her summoned the snowy owl, Hedwig swooped down to him with an envelope attached to her leg. Hey girl, did Tonks send you back? He asked his owl while removing the letter. Hedwig gave him an affectionate nibble, while also taking some food for herself from his plate. With a peck, the snowy owl flew off to the owlery to rest. Harry opened the envelope and read the letter. Tonks thanked him for the chocolates and said her Valentine's gift was in the envelope. Curious, Harry pulled out what remained in the envelope and smiled when he saw the magical photograph of Tonks smiling at him. The Tonks in the photo then stepped backwards a few steps and revealed that she was wearing a very skimpy bikini. Harry felt his cheeks heating up as he watched photo Tonks increase the size of her breasts or give herself a ridiculously curvy body that was the perfect hourglass shape. She even turned around and showed him her ass in multiple sizes. Harry, are you okay? Your face is rather red, Penny asked in concern. What did Tonks send you? Nothing, Harry exclaimed as he quickly stuffed the picture into the inner pocket of his robes. Penny raised an eyebrow at his reaction before sighing. She sent you something naughty, didn't she? Penny asked with a shake of her head. No, Harry replied, though he didn't sound convincing even to himself. Penny rolled her eyes before ruffling his hair a bit. Don't let her corrupt you completely, Harry, Penny advised with a small smile. Okay, Harry agreed and they both started on their lunch. Last week of February. Carefully, slowly, almost there. Harry mumbled to himself as he filled in the last of the magic circuits with his Ulm circuit material. Even with his alchemic pen, it was a pain in the ass to fill in the circuits on a round surface. But after multiple failed attempts at it, Harry finally finished his new item prototype. Just let it cool and finish solidifying, then we can test out Auror Batten prototype number 1. Harry had copied the idea of the policeman's baton from the non-magical world, and applied his new runic array to a Silvuan baton with Ulm circuits. If the baton operated the same way as the prototype knife, then Harry would give the first one to Tonks, and make a few more if the Auror department was interested. Now I just need to test it out. Harry mused on how to do that without using himself as the guinea pig. Penny would be upset with him if he tested out his items on himself again. Maybe I should take a page out of the Weasley twins' handbook and pay some people to be test subjects. With a chuckle, Harry pulled a piece of blank parchment over and set about writing out his proposal. He'd have Penny take a look at it and help revise it when she came by. For now, he'd continue looking over the communication mirror notes he'd gotten from Remus. He'd been puzzling over them in his free time lately, but he still couldn't figure out what made the successful pair work. Remus was indeed a meticulous notekeeper. Harry had read through the Marauder's attempt to use the same charms and enchantments that worked on the successful pair on others. The others were all failures, though, each and every time. It was truly baffling as to why. The first week of March, "Harry, you're sure you know what you're doing?" Penny questioned in concern. "It's not really any different from a knife, just bigger and double-edged." Harry tried to reassure Penny as he held his first successfully forged sword prototype. He had yet to actually etch the runic array into it, but his success with the Vitris Auri and Sylvain knife had spurred him to move forward with the next step to his artifact sword. He'd worked out a new addition to his runic array as well. The enhanced sequence was fairly common as a boosting sequence to increase either potency or range of a magical effect. The best part was that unlike the transfer sequence, the enhanced sequence was much more mutable. It had only taken Harry 3 attempts to rewrite it, so that it would integrate into his array. "I'm staying to make sure you don't do something dangerous as a test," Penny informed him, and Harry nodded. She hadn't been overly pleased about him wanting to hire test subjects either, but she'd relented as it was better than him testing his prototypes on himself. Harry had even promised to do the tests as close to the hospital wing as possible, if it would put her at ease. Speaking of, he needed to set up the first tests of the Auror Baton soon, now that Penny was on board. "I appreciate your concern, Penny, thank you." Harry smiled at her, and Penny gave him a small smile in return. Harry took out his adamantite etching tool and set to work on the hand and a half broadsword he'd forged. As he etched the runes into the metal, he had a good feeling about this prototype. By the time evening had fallen, Harry had finished etching the array and the circuit lines along the blade. After a break for dinner, Harry and Penny returned to the workshop, and Harry made enough Vitris Auri to fill in the array and circuit lines. He wanted to wait for it to cool and solidify so that he could test it right away. Unfortunately, curfew was getting close, and Penny wouldn't allow him to break the rules as he wanted. On their way back towards Ravenclaw Tower, they overheard Filch complaining about one of the girls' bathrooms on the second floor flooding again. The caretaker was grumbling and muttering about this being the 5th time this year, so Penny and Harry made sure to stay out of the man's sight. Filch was unpleasant normally, give the grizzled old man a reason to be angry, and he'd invent reasons to try and punish a student. The next afternoon, Harry grinned widely as he lifted his prototype sword in his hands and checked over the array and circuits. Everything looked good, the runes were perfect, and the circuits were properly spaced. All in all, Harry was very happy with this prototype. Now all that was left was to test it. With a thought, a large Lumos charm appeared in the air before Harry, checking to make sure Penny was far enough away, which she was as she waved to him from next to the wall. Harry made a slow swing through the Lumos charm. The ball of light blinked out as soon as the blade passed through it. Harry stood there for a moment and then cheered. "It worked! Yes!" Harry exclaimed happily. "Congratulations, Harry!" Penny smiled brightly at him. She was happy to see Harry succeed on something he'd been working on for so long. "It's another step in the right direction." Harry grinned as he checked over the runes and circuits again. He had to make sure there was no damage from the prototype using its effect after all. It wouldn't really be a success if one used destroyed the sword. Seeing that everything looked undamaged, Harry summoned another Lumos charm and dispelled it with a stab from the prototype sword. So slashing and stabbing both work. That's good to know. "How many tests will you put this one through?" Penny inquired as Harry checked over the sword again for any damages. "Several, mostly to check its durability and make sure the runes and circuits hold up. Though I'll also try cutting different spells too. It would be kind of a lame creation if it could only put out Lumos charms." Harry chuckled as he placed the sword down. "You said you might have had a way to avoid the monster's petrification, right?" "Yes. After some in-depth study of cockatrices, I've found out that breaking the line of sight with one nullifies its petrifying gaze. Most people that have slain one wore some kind of enchanted eye protection to block out the cockatrice's ability. If we had something similar, we shouldn't have to worry about the monster's gaze," Penny informed him as she showed him her notes on the subject. "I could probably make something like that with a bit of time." Harry mused as he looked over the historical accounts of wizards and witches that had brought down cockatrices in the past. Even without their gaze, they were still fast, strong, and armed with razor-sharp, poisonous talons. They definitely earned their XXX danger rating. If Slytherin's monster was indeed some kind of hybrid of cockatrice and magical snake, then it would pay to be prepared. That weekend, Harry grinned at the small turnout for his tests. About 10 students had gathered in an unused classroom down the hall from the hospital wing. At one galleon per test, Harry was burning some money for testing, but Penny wouldn't let him test on students, even willing ones, without proper compensation for potential injury. "Thank you all for coming." Harry welcomed the 10 students. He didn't know any of them personally, but he had 2 girls and 8 boys. None from Slytherin, but 4 from Hufflepuff, 5 from Gryffindor, and 2 from Ravenclaw. So it was a good mix of people. "You're all here today to help me test out my newest item." Harry grinned as he held up the Auror Baton prototype. "Now, this is a prototype for an item I hope to sell to the Aurors to aid them in their work. It should do nothing more than make whatever limb is struck with it unable to move for a time. That's it? One of the Gryffindors asked. That's it, Harry nodded to him. It'll wear off, right? One of the girls asked, a Hufflepuff judging by her uniform. Yes, the effect is only temporary. If you feel uncomfortable, tell me, and we will make the short trip to the hospital wing. Harry replied, and all 10 of the students nodded. Harry moved over to the first student and gently tapped him with the baton. I don't think it worked, the Gryffindor boy remarked as he moved his arm around. Perhaps a bit stronger? Harry mused as he reared back a little farther and struck the boy's arm a bit harder. Hey, that stings. The boy trailed off as he realized his arm was flopping down at his side, unmoving. Can you move your arm? Harry asked, and the Gryffindor shook his head, still staring at his arm that he couldn't feel anymore. This is weird, the boy remarked as he used his other hand to move his dead arm around. It's like I slept on it for way too long, except it's not cold. That's what I was going for. Harry nodded, pleased with the first test. Can I get the next volunteer, please? He asked politely, and one of the Hufflepuff boys stepped forward. Harry hoped the rest of the tests went as well. Chapter 18, Birthday, Attack, Rage, and Hate. Thursday, April 1st, Hogwarts. Harrikins! Tonks cheered as she pulled the boy into a hug. I'm here just like you asked. What did you make this time? The metamorph, currently pink-haired and purple-eyed, was bubbly as usual. Harry had sent her a letter asking her to come to Hogwarts on her birthday for her present. Never one to miss out on a chance to tease Harry or Penny, Tonks had set up a visit after classes to come see them. You're going to love this, Nim. Harry grinned as he held a wrapped package out to her. Thank you, Harrikins. Tonks smiled at the second year before unwrapping her gift. Opening the box, she was met with a metal baton, black in color, which looked very similar to the ones she'd seen Muggle police have when she went into London with her father. Is this a police baton? Same idea, but magical for Auror use. Harry grinned brightly at her. Magical how? Tonks asked as she picked up the baton and got a feel for its weight. Pour a little mana into it and give them a swat, and whatever you hit goes to sleep for several minutes. Harry smiled as he happily explained the item's function. You actually finished the idea from Christmas? Tonks blinked at him, a mixture of shock, surprise, and impressed on her face. It's only been 4 months. Don't most enchanted objects take longer to figure out? Well, I had the knife already working, sort of. So it was just a matter of finding and rewriting the proper runic sequences into a functional array. Harry shrugged, disregarding the multitude of attempts it had taken him. It was worth it for Nim. I think you're downplaying your skills a bit there, Harrikins. Tonks chuckled as she looked over her gift. I think I'll test it out real quick. Test it? Harry tilted his head confused. His eyes widened when he saw the mischievous grin on her lips. Tap! Tonks exclaimed as she tapped his left shoulder, and Harry's arm hung limply at his side. Oi! Harry squawked at the laughing young woman. What did I miss? Penny asked, hearing the laughter as soon as she opened the door to the guest meeting room. Seeing Harry with a floppy arm and Tonks laughing, the prefect quickly put the situation together. Tonks! What? The metamorph grinned. I didn't do anything. You have no proof. Harry's arm is proof enough. Penny rolled her eyes at her older friend. No more testing the baton for either of you, agreed? I didn't test anything, Harry proclaimed while glaring at the still snickering Tonks. Don't make me confiscate your gift, Tonks. Penny threatened the junior Auror. I'm not a student, Tonks retorted as she hid the baton away from Penny's gaze. You can't just take my stuff. I'm still a prefect, and I can confiscate anything that might be dangerous or disruptive. Penny informed the metamorph with a try-me look on her face. Spoil sport. Tonks stuck out her tongue playfully. Yes, someone has to be the mature one, though. Otherwise, you and Harry would end up hexing each other too much. Penny sighed in a put-upon manner, though the grin on her lips took any heat from her words. Do let me know how it works, Nim. Harry spoke again, an empty vial in his right hand while he slowly clenched and unclenched his left hand. I'd love to get field data on the baton. Did you just drink a potion for your arm? Tonks questioned curiously. Yeah, it's a variant of pepper-up potion, called the Restore Tonic, Harry informed them. Madame Pomfrey gave me a couple extra for my tests. Apparently it's meant to help with the side effects of magical exhaustion. Works well for undoing the effects of the baton, too. That's good to know. At least there's a way to undo it quickly if necessary. Penny nodded. I'll let you know how it works out, Harry. Tonks smiled at him warmly. Thank you for the gift. I'll use it well. You're welcome, Nim. Harry smiled back. He really liked seeing her smile like that. So, are we having some cake and ice cream too? Tonks questioned with a grin. Yes, Tonks. I talked to the house elves. Penny giggled at the older girl. It'll be here momentarily. Yay! Tonks let out the most overly dramatic, childlike squeal she could, and Harry and Penny just sighed at the bubbly metamorph. There was never a dull moment with their lovable friend around. Throughout the rest of April, Harry and Penny continued to work on their schoolwork and practice wandless magic together. Harry also continued to produce his Wardbreaker talismans in hopes of showing them to Tonks and her boss, Madame Bones. From Tonks' letters, the baton had gone over well enough for Madame Bones to temporarily approve its use in the field. Tonks' senior Auror mentor, Mad Eye Moody, had also shown interest in the item. With any luck, the baton would prove so useful that the DMLE would want them to be standard issue for the Aurors. If they did, then Harry was sure he could market his Wardbreaker to them as well. Work on the artifact sword prototype was coming along well enough. The Sylvan and Vitris Auri broadsword still hadn't failed, even after dozens of tests, and Harry was pleased that he had a solid base down for the future. His next steps would be to make the next prototype with a more extensive array. Adding in another effect or two to the currently working array and then testing the new sword, once said array was completed, May was the time that Harry and his study buddies ramped up their time in the library. Hermione was trying to devote almost every waking moment to studying. Only the suggestions of Padma, Mandy, and Luna had kept the bushy-haired girl from going off the deep end and burning herself out. Harry was determined to do well, though he honestly felt pretty good about his upcoming exams. He wasn't Hermione, who tried to memorize their textbooks half the time, but he did very well in his classes. Even Snape, the hateful man that he was, still gave Harry acceptable on his work in potions. Though he was fairly certain if he was anybody else, he'd be getting at least an exceeds expectations from the greasy potions master. May 29th. Harry stared down at the hospital wing bed that held Penny. The blonde prefect was petrified, the victim of an attack by the heir, the first one since Colin Creevey. He'd almost thought the person had given up. But then he'd heard the news of an attack, then the news that it was a prefect. Harry had run to the hospital wing as fast as possible. Aurors were scouring the castle for the culprit, starting from the second floor where Penny had been found. The corridor near Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, once again flooded, had been where she was found by the Aurors. Professors were quickly scrambling to get students into their common rooms. But in the commotion, Harry had made his way to the hospital wing. Now, looking down at his friend, stuck in almost mid-stride, he couldn't help but lament that he had only finished the anti-petrification goggles this morning. If he'd just been faster, Penny would have had a pair to wear while she was alone. The Aurors that had brought Penny in had left by the time Harry had arrived. The second year had been looking at Penny's petrified form ever since he'd gotten there. It was only after several minutes that the boy noticed the edge of parchment poking out of her robe pocket. Knowing that Penny had probably been on her way either to the library or from it, Harry pulled the piece of parchment from her pocket and unfolded it. There were multiple lines of writing in Penny's neat handwriting, all of them with questions about Slytherin's monster and the Chamber of Secrets. It was when his eyes landed on the last lines that Harry felt the proverbial light bulb turn on. The last lines on the parchment read, Myrtle Warren was the only victim the last time the chamber was opened. Myrtle Warren potentially moaning Myrtle? Chamber of Secrets entrance hidden in the same bathroom? Access to all of Hogwarts through plumbing? For the first time in his young life, Harry Potter felt true rage and hate fill his heart. He shook in fury as he looked between the parchment and Penny. Did the heir somehow find out that Penny was looking into the incident? Did Penny get too close and was therefore attacked? Harry folded the parchment with shaking hands and put it in his own pocket. Only his alternate occlumency kept him from rushing straight out of the hospital wing and towards the bathroom. The mass of mental brambles that completely encompassed his mind and protection was also keeping him from completely losing it. He carefully leaned close to Penny before speaking. I'll fix this, Penny. You have my word, Harry whispered to the petrified teen. He stood up and turned from the hospital wing. He quickly made his way to his workshop, the rage and hate inside of him swirling around like a storm. He was going to fix this. No one hurt Penny and got away with it. No one. He dodged around some panicking students and dashed down the corridor to his workshop. Once inside, Harry breathed deeply and used his occlumency to direct all the rage inside of him to the task at hand. He quickly grabbed the anti-petrification googles he'd completed this morning. Then he took almost the entire stack of Wardbreaker talismans and stuffed them into his robe pockets. Finally, he grabbed his prototype sword and his invisibility cloak. He'd taken to keeping the cloak inside his mokeskin pouch, after Sirius had confirmed that it had indeed belonged to James. Now invisible, Harry left his hidden workshop and made his way towards Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. That's bloody fantastic, Harry growled quietly, seeing the words, Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever, written on the wall in what appeared to be blood. He stormed into the flooded bathroom and closed the door behind him. Removing the hood of the cloak, he started pulling out his Wardbreaker talismans and sticking them to the walls, sinks, stalls, and floor. What are you doing here? The ghost known as Moaning Myrtle asked timidly from one of the stalls. Fixing the problem. Harry replied without stopping what he was doing. You should leave Myrtle. I don't know if these will affect a ghost in any way, but you might not want to find out, he stated as he placed the last talisman, the 20th, on the wall next to the door. With that, he drew his wand and pointed to each talisman in turn. One by one, each of the disc-like items glowed blue. When all 20 were glowing, Harry flicked his wand, pulled up the hood of the cloak, and exited the bathroom. Myrtle decided to leave at Harry's warning, and several seconds later, an incomprehensible noise, somewhere between a shriek and the sound of multiple panes of glass breaking simultaneously, came from the bathroom. Without a word, Harry threw open the door and looked at what had happened. The bathroom was a wreck. The walls and floor had small cracks in them. The stone looked aged and dull. The sinks and mirrors were cracked, and there between the broken sinks was a massive hole in the floor. Harry stared coldly at the hole and marched forward. Cleverly hidden, he'd admit. He certainly wouldn't have suspected the fabled Chamber of Secrets to be hidden in a girl's bathroom. But he was far too angry to really care right now. Seeing no way down the hole, other than the obvious, Harry removed his cloak and stuffed it into his empty pocket. And then he sat on the edge and wrapped the dull broadsword prototype in his robe. He then slid down the massive pipe. He didn't know how long he slid for, maybe a couple of minutes. But he eventually dropped into what appeared to be a pile of animal bones. Bloody cheery! Harry rumbled angrily as he stomped his way forward. He conjured a large Lumos charm and lit up the area. Snake motifs were everywhere as he walked. Statues of snakes lined the walkway, and he eventually came to a large vault-like door. I can feel the magic in this thing, he muttered to himself as he examined the door. Seeing no way to get the door open manually, Harry growled and pulled the prototype sword. Placing the tip of the dull blade on the edge of the door, Harry dragged the sword along the length of the large circular door. A strange sound, almost like the hiss of a snake combined with the hiss of air escaping a tire, rang out, and Harry watched as the metal snakes on the door withdrew and the large door swung open. Not warded, Harry wondered as he looked at his prototype. Was it just locked with a password? Lucky me, the magic of that type of locking spell deactivates once the password is given. But removing the magic powering the spell does the same thing. The rage bubbling inside of him flared again now that the obstacle was out of the way. With a grimace, he walked into the chamber proper and saw another pathway lined with snake statues and pools of water on the sides. Stalking forward, Harry spotted what appeared to be an older student, judging by the Hogwarts robes, standing over a smaller student on the floor. Ah, now isn't this a surprise? The older student commented as he turned to face Harry. Harry Potter, how did you get down here? Who are you and who is that? Harry demanded, trying to get a look at the smaller student. This is just a dumb girl that spilled her heart out to the first person that would listen to her. The teen chuckled darkly as he moved away to reveal Ginny Weasley lying on the floor. The redhead looked pale, unnaturally so, and Harry turned to face the older student again. Who are you? Harry asked again, rage beginning to seep into his voice. Tom Marvolo Riddle. The now-named Tom answered as he wrote out his name in flaming letters. But you know me by a different name. With a wave of the wand in his hand, the letters rearranged themselves to spell, I am Lord Voldemort. Voldemort? Harry questioned before staring coldly at the teen. Hagrid said you might still be alive somewhere, if only barely. But you're far too young to be the real Voldemort. Who are you, really? Ah, but I am Voldemort, the greatest wizard to ever live. Tom smiled darkly. More specifically, I'm a memory. A remnant of Voldemort, kept safe in a book should anything happen to my body. Now tell me, Harry Potter, how is it that some infant stopped the greatest Dark Lord to ever live? No idea, but I'm going to have to ask you to die again. Harry bit out as he pointed his prototype sword at the teen. A sword? Really, Harry? How very muggle. Tom scoffed derisively. You cannot harm this body. I'm only a memory until her life fades and I am restored. Nothing can harm me. I'm still willing to try. Harry snarled as he took a step forward. Tom waved the wand in his hand and a bright bolt of yellow sparks flew at Harry. Without a thought, Harry swung his prototype sword. The yellow spell spilt in two and dispersed without touching Harry. What? Tom stared in shock. What is that sword? What did you do? The same thing I'm going to do to you. Harry snapped at the shade, specter, memory, or whatever the hell he claimed to be. I think not, Tom retorted before facing the large face on the wall and hissing at it. The mouth of the stone face opened and Harry heard something moving. From the mouth of the statue emerged a truly massive serpent. Dark black-green scales, a long, sinuous body, small horn-like protrusion on the back of the head, a mouth full of fangs, including two large retractable ones, and the bright yellow eyes that gazed at everything in the chamber. So it was a basilisk, Harry intoned. If he hadn't still been so angry, he might have questioned why Colin or Penny hadn't died upon seeing the serpent. The thought didn't even cross his mind, though. Yes, the basilisk the greatest of all serpents. Now you will die down here, Harry Potter. I will be restored and continue my path as the greatest wizard to ever live, and you will be forgotten, merely a footnote in my glorious rise." Tom laughed in a way that Harry felt wasn't quite sane. Tom then hissed at the basilisk, and the King of Serpents turned its baleful yellow eyes on the boy. Harry felt irritation in his eyes, like they were a bit dry, as well as a small headache. But otherwise, nothing else happened. Well, these work better than anticipated. Must be the second layer of protection. Harry mused to himself. How? How are you not dead? Tom demanded as he stared at the still-living second year. You think I'm wearing these goggles for fashion? Harry asked rhetorically. The basilisk made a loud hiss and looked Harry directly in the eyes. The irritation and headache got a bit stronger, but Harry now knew the first thing he was going to take out his seething rage on. Kill him! Tom yelled without the hissing this time. I'm going to turn you into materials for my work, Harry roared at the large serpent. He didn't expect to have the massive basilisk hiss back at him. A strange feeling overcame Harry for a moment. He couldn't quite describe it, though. But he knew for a fact that the basilisk had just laid claim on his flesh, and magic should he die. Something snapped into place in Harry's awareness, and he suddenly realized what had just happened. A rite of conquest had just been formed, and the loser would have their life, flesh, and magic taken by the winner. The basilisk reared up higher, and Harry realized that it was going to launch itself forward to strike at him. He breathed deeply before exhaling a massive cloud of smoke. The thick cloud made the serpent hesitate as it lost track of its target. Worse still, the smoke was still billowing outwards, filling up more and more of the chamber. A sudden force hitting the basilisk's body had the snake whipping its head around to try and see through the smoke covering the floor. That didn't work. Harry cursed in his mind as his prototype sword bounced off the large, thick scales of the basilisk. Spells wouldn't do anything to a basilisk's scales and hide. They had incredible magic resistance, and were apparently hard enough to act as armor for the serpent. Nothing you do will work, Harry Potter. You can only run and hide. Tom crowed loudly, enjoying the struggles of the second year. Harry had already cast the impervious charm on his face to keep the smoke from filling his lungs. But without a way to kill the basilisk, the shade was right. The basilisk began to thrash around the smoke cloud, trying to strike Harry with its long body and disperse the thick smoke. Harry ran from the wild thrashing and could hear that Voldemort shade laughing at his misfortune. Harry conjured up multiple Lumos charms, all different colors, and sent them above the smoke. With a thought, the charms began to flash brightly and then dim, over and over again, rapidly switching from blindingly bright to mostly dim. The basilisk hissed loudly as it closed its large eyes and thrashed its body around. Tom covered his own eyes from the blinding lights, and therefore didn't notice Harry charging towards him. "Shut your bloody mouth!" Harry roared at the shade as he swung his prototype sword and sliced through the specter. "How?" Tom screeched as his form wavered momentarily. "What is that?" he demanded angrily, still having to cover his eyes from the flaring lights. "Damn it, that didn't work." Harry angrily bit out only to run as the basilisk rushed towards him, the long tongue flicking out of its mouth, smelling the air, and letting the King of Serpents track him down. Harry hurriedly dashed around the snake statues, and the basilisk crashed into them. The snake reared back, shaking its head and letting out another loud hiss. Harry saw his chance. A large fireball snapped into existence above the second year's hand, and he launched it into the basilisk's open mouth. The flames exploded into the snake's mouth, eliciting pained screeches from the beast as it flailed in pain. A burst of flames appeared near the ceiling, and a beautiful trilling song filled the chamber. Looking up, Harry spotted a phoenix. At least it looked like one from the books he'd read at Hagrid's recommendation, though the oddest thing was that the bird was carrying the old sorting hat in its talons. "What is this?" Tom snarled as he looked up at the phoenix, while the basilisk had dunked its head into one of the nearby pools to deal with the flames and burns inside its mouth. The phoenix circled the chamber, trilling its beautiful and uplifting song before dropping the sorting hat next to Harry. Harry didn't know what to make of this, but grabbed the hat and ran from the basilisk as it pulled its head from the water. "Why are you here?" Harry demanded of the hat as he ducked behind another snake statue. "You are defending the school. As such, there is something that must be delivered to you." The sorting hat spoke, and Harry felt something within the hat. Grabbing the object, Harry pulled on what felt like a handle. What emerged from the sorting hat was a brilliant silvery sword, the guard decorated with rubies and a name engraved into the metal. "Gryffindor? Is this what I think it is?" Harry asked the sorting hat as he ran to another statue. The basilisk slithered towards him with speed, intent on crushing him, it seemed. "Yes, the sword of Gryffindor. Only a true champion of Hogwarts can wield this sword in defense of the school." The sorting hat informed him. "Great, but I don't even know how to use one sword, much less two," Harry exclaimed as he moved between the statues, keeping the basilisk from rushing him. Harry didn't get any more time to think, however. The basilisk had reared up over the statue and was descending on him, jaws wide open to devour him. Fuck! Harry swore as he thrust the sword of Gryffindor upwards. The legendary blade just so happened to be in his right hand at the time. As a right-handed person, Harry's natural reaction to use his dominant hand drove the sword into the serpent's mouth. Harry hit the ground as the basilisk's weight came down on him. His whole arm was inside the snake's mouth, and he felt one of the smaller fangs puncture his arm. The snake flailed its tail and slumped over the statue, but the damage was already done. The sword of Gryffindor had pierced through the top of the basilisk's mouth and lodged into its brain. Harry pulled his arm out of the jaws of the now dead Serpent King, taking the sword with him. The silvery blade was covered in blood and a blackish liquid that Harry couldn't identify. No, no, Tom yelled at seeing the basilisk dead. Bloody hell, this hurts, Harry growled as an intensely painful feeling crept up his arm from the puncture that the smaller fang had left. With some effort, Harry stood up and staggered multiple steps forward. You may have slain the basilisk, Harry Potter, but it's a Pyrrhic victory at best. Tom cackled at seeing the injury on Harry's arm. The second year still struggled forward, looking the shade in the eyes defiantly. How does it feel, I wonder, to have the most potent venom in the world coursing through your veins? Shut up, Harry panted as his steps grew shaky and his vision began to blur. Ah yes, a moment of silence for the soon-to-be departed. How apropos, Harry. Tom chuckled humorlessly. I said, shut up, Harry roared, as he swung his prototype sword downward. He couldn't feel his right arm anymore, so he could only lash out with his left, the prototype sword in hand. The dull blade slammed down onto the black book on the floor between Ginny and Tom. Ah! Tom screamed as a line appeared on his almost corporeal body. What did you do? What is that sword? He snarled as he raised the wand in his hand. Sod off! Harry growled out as he stabbed the tip of his sword into the book. No! Tom howled as a gaping hole appeared in his torso, the shade losing any form of solidity as the wand fell from its incorporeal hands. Harry collapsed onto his knees and forced himself to raise his left arm again. Stop! Tom demanded as he held out his hands towards Harry. Don't you ever touch her again? Harry spat at the wispy shade as he slammed the tip of his prototype sword down on the book again. He felt a strange amount of resistance at first, before his prototype pierced the book entirely. The shade exploded into wisps of blackness that dispersed near instantly. What happened next shocked even Harry's venom-muddled mind. His prototype sword fell apart in his hand, not into pieces, but into inert, sand-like bits of metal. The entire sword practically turned into dust while he was holding it. Nothing was left as Harry collapsed to the ground. What the? Harry tried to speak, but collapsed and started to black out. A sudden flapping was heard vaguely through his fuzzy senses before something fell onto his wound. Harry couldn't describe what happened next. One moment he was in absolute agony. The next he felt as if there was cool water running through his veins. Several moments later, or was it minutes, Harry couldn't even begin to tell, but he felt much better than he did before he collapsed. Sitting up heavily, Harry looked over and saw the phoenix standing beside him. The majestic bird cocked its head slightly, and Harry vaguely recalled reading about this. Phoenix tears, right? Harry breathed out as he gently stroked the bird's head. Thanks for the save. He thanked the phoenix kindly, and the bird seemed to puff up slightly at the thanks. I couldn't have a bit more for research purposes, could I? He joked, and the phoenix trilled out a slightly less beautiful note. I'll take that as a no, then. Looking over the sword of Gryffindor, Harry admired the legendary blade. Even with the blood and black ichor on it, the blade was still amazing. Hey, Sorting Hat, what should I do with this? As the one who drew it from the hat, you may hold on to it for as long as you need. The Sorting Hat replied. What if someone takes it? Harry questioned. He'd love to look over the sword and try to learn what he could from it. It would only help his own attempts to create his artifact sword, until someone truly claims the sword. It will always be able to return to my care. The Sorting Hat informed the second year. So only a direct descendant of Gryffindor or Erdun? Harry asked, and the hat seemed to perk up. Correct, Mr. Potter. I am surprised you know that. The Sorting Hat acknowledged. I met a dwarf a few months ago. Harry shrugged before he grinned. I think I'll hold on to it for a short time. As you will. The Sorting Hat gave its equivalent to a shrug. Harry hurriedly pulled out his invisibility cloak and wrapped the sword of Gryffindor in it, rendering the legendary blade invisible. He tucked the invisible sword into the inside of his robe, the large inner pocket on the left side actually holding almost half the length of the blade. Just keeping his left arm pressed against his side slightly would prevent the sword from falling. What's going on? Ginny spoke up from behind him a moment later, and Harry turned to face her. I've fixed the problem, Harry replied to the confused redhead. Suddenly there were voices coming from further back, the way Harry had entered the chamber. Almost faster than Harry could process, Aurors came pouring into the Chamber of Secrets. Amelia Bones and Dumbledore, both among them and both zeroing in on the two kids. What's happened here? Amelia asked gently, though with undertones of urgency. Dumbledore looked between Harry and Ginny, as if trying to discern if either of them needed immediate help. "I'm sorry," Ginny wailed suddenly. "It was Tom. He made me do things. I couldn't control myself, and I started blacking out, and—" By this point, the redhead was bawling and incomprehensible. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity for Harry. He told Amelia and Dumbledore what had happened, minus the part about the Sword of Gryffindor. After all, the Phoenix and the Sorting Hat had disappeared without Harry even noticing at some point. So why even hint that he had the legendary blade before he could try and study it a bit? It wasn't until his least favorite professor loudly spoke up that Harry fully focused back on the here and now. "Don't touch the basilisk. It's property of Hogwarts," Snape yelled at a group of Aurors that had been examining the beast's carcass. Even from a distance, Harry could see the look of delight that Snape had on his face at what was most assuredly a bevy of incredibly rare potions ingredients. "Actually, it belongs to me." Harry spoke loudly, and Snape turned to face him so fast the man's greasy hair whipped around. "Potter, stop spouting nonsense. This creature has been living under Hogwarts for centuries. It belongs to the school." Snape raised his voice. "I conquered it. It belongs to me by magical right," Harry retorted, and Snape looked like he'd been slapped. "Stop lying, Potter," Snape replied stiffly. "I'm sure this can be cleared up quickly." Dumbledore stepped between the two. "I do happen to know the proper spell to determine magical ownership." "Please do, Headmaster." Harry readily agreed. No way was he losing out on all of the materials that the basilisk presented. A few waves of his wand, followed by a rather intricate series of loops and flicks, and the basilisk and Harry both glowed with a green light for a moment before it faded away. It would seem that Mr. Potter is correct, Severus. The basilisk is his by right of conquest. To take even a single scale from the beast would be considered theft, Dumbledore informed the Doer Potions Master. Snape made a face that was between a sneer and the look of someone that had just been slapped. It was an odd expression, to say the least. "I'll need to contact Sirius." Harry spoke up as he looked the massive serpent over. "Going to need to bring in professionals to move this and render it down." "What will you do with it all, Mr. Potter?" Dumbledore questioned. "If you don't mind me asking, of course." "It'll become materials for my enchanting," Harry informed the old man. "What of the flesh?" "I don't believe that can be used for enchanting." Dumbledore looked at the boy. "Snake is edible, right?" Harry questioned as he looked up at the old man. "Some species are, I believe." Dumbledore nodded. "You're planning to eat it. Why?" "Spite, mostly," Harry replied honestly while glaring at the carcass. "It could have killed Penny." Dumbledore wasn't sure whether to be relieved that Harry cared about Miss Clearwater so much, or if he should be worried for the same reason. Chapter 19. Restoration and an Invitation. Harry headed for the hospital wing as soon as he'd stopped being questioned by the Aurors. Dumbledore had taken Ginny to his office where her parents were waiting. Harry quickly reached the wing and entered. He found Penny sitting up in bed and looking a little confused at how she'd gotten there. Madame Pomfrey appeared to be talking to the blonde prefect, but Harry couldn't care less. The second year rushed to Penny's bedside and pulled the older girl into a hug. "Harry?" Penny questioned as she was hugged. "I'm glad you're all right, Penny, so glad," Harry murmured into the hug. Penny softly smiled as she returned his hug. "Madame Pomfrey says I'll be fine," Penny assured him as they continued to hold each other. "I was saying that." Pomfrey nodded before looking crossly at Harry. "Until a certain someone came barreling into the wing and interrupted me." Sorry," Harry mumbled out as he refused to let go of Penny. "So what happened after I was petrified?" Penny asked. "The last thing I remember was a pair of large, bright yellow eyes, reflecting off the water on the floor of the second-floor corridor." "I fixed the problem, Penny." Harry finally pulled back. "The basilisk in the chamber is dead." "It was a basilisk?" Penny questioned before what Harry said caught up with her. "Wait, what do you mean you fixed the problem?" Harry suddenly felt like he'd said too much. "Harry, please tell me you didn't go off half-cocked and charge into the Chamber of Secrets by yourself." "It wasn't half-cocked. I had a plan, sort of." Harry defended his actions. "It sounds like you took revenge on my behalf." Penny raised an eyebrow at him. Well, that's about right, I guess," Harry admitted with an exhale of breath. "I was so angry when I saw you petrified. My occlumency kept me from going off entirely. But I went and got some of my things and then headed for the chamber. Your theory about where it was hidden was spot on, by the way. I thought that you'd been attacked because you'd gotten too close." Harry, you could have died," Penny chastised even as she pulled him into a hug and held him tightly. "I was only petrified. It hasn't even been a full day, and I've already been cured with Mandrake Draft. But if you had died, then you would be gone. What would that have solved?" I know, I was just so angry, I barely thought. Harry returned the hug and sighed at the familiar warmth of Penny. Don't risk your life on something like revenge, Harry, Penny mumbled into his hair. I'd rather just have you here with me. Penny? Harry pulled back and blinked at the prefect. He was no expert, but that almost sounded like a confession. What you did was reckless and poorly thought out, Penny admonished before her expression softened, and a warmth entered her eyes as she smiled. But thank you for caring about me so much, Harry. With that, the prefect's lips met Harry's in a brief kiss before she pulled back. Harry felt, well, he didn't quite know. He was happy, elated even, but also confused, and he kind of wanted to do that again. That was, wow. Harry stumbled over his words a bit. Glad you think so. Penny giggled before she tapped his nose with her index finger. But I'm still telling Tonks what you did too, she teased. Please don't. Harry whined, already knowing that Tonks would blow the whole incident out of proportion. She tended to overreact when her friends and family were involved. He'd be lucky if she didn't practically smother him for a good week, once she learned of his revenge for Penny. I'm going to. Penny grinned at him while Harry sighed. With a delightful giggle, Penny pulled him back into a hug, and the two just sat together and held each other for a while. Harry Mirror called Sirius several minutes later and explained the situation, including the need for professionals to move and render the basilisk for parts and meat. Sirius was less than pleased to hear that Harry had risked his life and was already planning to flew to Hogwarts to berate him for it, after he finished giving Dumbledore a piece of his mind for this whole chamber business. So it went that Harry was scolded by a worried Sirius for the better part of an hour, his godfather moving through various emotions throughout his admonishment, bouncing between worried, concerned, irritated, proud, and several others. Harry agreed not to put himself in such danger again, and Sirius nearly hugged the life out of him. Sirius had promised to get professionals to retrieve the basilisk and start rendering it down before he left. With the chamber fiasco over with, the school resumed normal activity and routines, the only interruptions being the Aurors leaving and the arrival of the Renderers the next day. All of Hogwarts had stood back and gaped at Slytherin's monster when the Renderers had hauled it out of the school on multiple floating boards. The sheer size of the basilisk had made more than one student shriek in terror. Many people knew that Harry had some involvement with the beast's death, and mad mental notes to never get on his bad side. Oh, Harrikins, Tonks had sweetly called out when she arrived, shortly after the Renderers had left. Harry had felt like bolting at the look on Tonks's face, but resolved himself to face his friend's worried wrath. That had lasted for a good half hour, with Tonks alternating between hugging him tightly and scolding him for doing something so insanely dangerous that not even Tonks herself would attempt it. Tonks had been very reluctant to leave Hogwarts and let Harry out of her sight, but Penny had managed to convince her after some time. Harry fell face first into his bed that night, mentally drained from the whole day. It was discovered that Lockhart had fled sometime during Ginny's abduction into the chamber, the bumbling peacock of a professor having been a bigger coward than Harry had previously thought. This was saying something, as Harry had already had a low opinion of the man to begin with. Dumbledore had, once again, had to step in and cover the defense against the dark arts classes for the end of the year. Harry and Penny wouldn't find out until much later that the man's running from Hogwarts had prompted an investigation into him. An investigation that had uncovered illegal memory charms and the lies he'd published to further embellish the achievements he'd stolen. June 20th. What have you brought me, Hedwig? Harry asked his snowy owl as she landed next to him at breakfast. The beautiful owl raised her leg to let Harry remove the letter and then helped herself to some of his breakfast before flying off to the owlery. Turning the letter over, Harry smiled at seeing the neat writing of Fleur Delacour. Opening the letter, Harry read over the first page as best as he could, since it was in French. Harry had asked Fleur to write to him in both French and English a while back to help him practice. Fleur had agreed, as it helped her practice her English as well. Harry still had a bit of trouble with some of the sentences, and switched over to the English copy on the second page to check his own comprehension. Letter. Bonjour, Harry. How have you been since our last letters? I have been well enough. 5th year at Beauxbatons hasn't been much of a challenge. My exams have gone well. OWLs were slightly nerve-inducing, but I feel I've done well on them. I hope your own exams have proven easy for you. How have your enchanting projects been working out? You told me the Auror Batten had been given a trial run with Miss Tonks in the field. I hope that is still going well. The ward breakers you mentioned sounded so interesting, I asked Madame Aveline about the concept. She was very interested, and we had an in-depth discussion over the facets of warding in relation to magical theory and spellcrafting. I hope all of your projects are coming along well. Incidentally, I have finally achieved the goal I set for myself this year when it came to my mana level. As of writing this letter to you, I have finally surpassed 6,000 mana. I was overjoyed to see my reading and know that all of my practice had paid off. Madame Aveline won't share the exact mana levels of the other students with me, but she assures me that I'm one of the most magically powerful students in Beauxbatons. Since the summer break is coming up, I have been given permission from my mother and father to invite you and your godfather over to our home. I hope you'll consider visiting so that we may meet in person for the first time. France is lovely in the summer months, I assure you. I hope for a favorable reply. I eagerly await your next letter, Harry. Sincerely, Fleur de la Cour. Letter. That could be interesting, Harry murmured to himself. Another letter from Fleur? Penny asked. Were you able to read the whole thing in French this time? You have been improving. Almost all of it, Harry grinned. A few words still stump me from time to time. If you ever want to work on it more, I'm available. Penny smiled at him. She'd been helping Harry with his French during their breaks from wandless practice for months now. Thank you, Penny, Harry smiled back. Fleur hit her goal that I told you about. She broke 6,000? Penny questioned, looking impressed. She beat me to it. I was at 5,664 when I checked the other day. Fleur has a knack for magic, especially fire magic. She's a Vila, so I'm guessing it's natural. Harry shrugged as he folded the letter and placed it inside his robe pocket. On what was your last reading, Harry? Penny asked curiously. It's been a while since you've checked to my knowledge. It has been a while, Harry admitted with a nod. We studied for exams quite a bit after all. Plus, I've been looking into the loss of my prototype, as well as researching the other sword. I still wonder about that. Penny shifted in her seat. It's an important piece for the school, but you were told you could hold on to it. I guess I'm a bit conflicted, especially after what you told me about your meeting Mr. Erden. Just Erden. Harry tried to imitate the dwarf's deep voice and failed. Penny giggled at his attempt, though. I don't plan to keep it forever. I just want enough time to look it over and learn all I can about it. Though it is very good at hiding most of its secrets. I think I might be able to figure out part of the enchantments woven into the metal. Well, then, let's head to the workshop after breakfast and check your mana level. Penny suggested, and Harry agreed. Maybe that feeling I've gotten from eating the basilisk meat means I've gained some of its magic. Harry laughed at the notion. I still don't see how you're eating that thing. Penny's nose scrunched up. It doesn't even sound good. Taylor has been cooking it in various different ways for me. I don't want her efforts to go to waste. Harry shook his head. Taylor had been over the moon to have to learn how to cook something new, like snake. The cheerful house elf had been popping into Hogwarts to deliver him lunch in his workshop on specified days. So far, the meat had been palatable, and with some recipes actually tasty. He'd had a bit of a rush when he'd eaten the first part of the basilisk meat, something he assumed came from the rite of conquest, but hadn't really worried about since he'd felt really good afterwards. He'd had no further rushes since the first time, but he did always feel something when he ate the basilisk meat, though he couldn't be sure if that wouldn't always happen regardless. When a witch or wizard ate the meat of a magical creature, the two finished their breakfast a short time later and left the Great Hall together. The familiar path through the castle was second nature to both of them now, and they arrived quickly. After closing the door behind them, Harry went to his desk work table and opened the drawer he kept his test frame in. Taking it in both hands, Harry poured his mana into the talisman. The number displayed wasn't what Harry was expecting, however, and it must have shown on his face as Penny spoke up. Harry, are you okay? You look shocked. Penny worried, and Harry shook his head for a second before turning the frame around to show her his reading. Displayed in the frame with the standard light numbers was the reading 5,160. I'm sure it's part of the rite of conquest. It's probably some kind of ritual symbolism being completed when I first ate the meat of the basilisk. Harry reasoned as he looked over his new reading. That was a massive increase for him, to say the least. But wouldn't you feel your mana growing by that much? Penny questioned at Harry's large increase. Do you actually feel your mana grow? Harry asked her in return. No, now that you mention it. Penny looked thoughtful as she puzzled over what they'd realized. So, we don't notice growth unless we try to use spells more often and see that we can cast more. Or we check it with the scouter or test frames, of course. Seems to be the case. Harry nodded as he pondered. Maybe because it's our new normal, we simply don't realize. We do realize when we use a large amount of mana, of course. The drop in our reserves brings about a feeling of lethargy. Do you think you'll keep getting this boost as you eat more of the basilisk? Penny wondered, and Harry shook his head. I feel a small bit of something every time I eat the meat, but nothing like the first time. Harry remembered. I think that was the majority of what I could gain right there. I suspect the rite of conquest is something like a ritual or contract made between two magical beings from a challenge between them. When I consumed the first part of the basilisk, I gained a portion of its mana all at once, and the repeated eating will only give me minuscule boosts, if any, from now on. Ritual symbolism of taking in the basilisk was completed the first time, so that's probably the rush I felt. I should have looked into it sooner. I partially believe that rush came from satisfying my own spite against the snake for petrifying you. Harry, that's sweet. In a weird way. But you should have definitely gotten checked out if you felt this rush when you ate the basilisk. Penny sighed, though she looked downwards to hide the pink on her cheeks at how much Harry cared about her. What if it had been something bad? Well, I felt really good afterwards, so I kind of put it out of my mind. Harry shrugged and Penny shook her head at his lackadaisical attitude about this. Well, at least this time it was something positive. Penny smiled. That smile then turned mischievous as she looked at Harry. We could pull a little prank on Tonks with this, you know? Pranks, Penny? Really? Harry had a fake, shocked look on his face. What happened to our rule-abiding prefect? The future head girl shouldn't be involved in such shenanigans. So you don't want to play a little prank on Tonks? Penny questioned sarcastically. Well, now I didn't say that. Harry smiled mischievously himself. What did you have in mind? The two friends spent the next while going over their idea to prank the final member of their little trio. The next weekend is June 26th. Still so secretive, Harry murmured to himself as he looked over the sword of Gryffindor. The dwarves certainly knew how to hide their secrets in the metal they forged. That was for certain. He'd been looking over the legendary sword for almost a full month now, and had only just gleaned a bit of knowledge from examining it. He knew the rubies he'd thought were decorative were actually linked to the sword's power, perhaps the true power that Drad Erden had briefly hinted at. The metal was most assuredly an alloy of magical steel, and what appeared to be adamantite. Though Harry suspected that another magical metal had been forged into the alloy as well, he couldn't identify it. But what I'm really looking for is how your magical ability works. Harry spoke to the sword. Now, how do you take in things that make you stronger? What constitutes as stronger anyway? Is it just any ability or function you don't already possess? The sword, of course, didn't answer him. But Harry picked it up and briefly ran his mana through the artifact sword. By feeling out the weapon's reaction to his mana, he should, hopefully, be able to glean a bit of information about its magical properties. This was a skill that he was still learning and fine-tuning, but it was essential to become a good artificer. Feeling with his mana as it flowed into the sword, Harry sank into the equivalent of an occlumency trance. He slowly felt through the sword, touching its own innate magic and feeling how it responded. The sword was closed off, for lack of a better term. His mana could be focused to the edge of the blade to increase sharpness. The blade itself was also greatly resistant to damage of both physical and magical nature. Continuing his feeling of the sword's magic, Harry did find something new this time. The blade seemed to have a small vortex of mana near the guard, so minuscule that even after several of these sessions, he'd never noticed it. Letting his mana touch the vortex, Harry felt his mana be drawn into the depths of the sword. Before he could try to follow this small bit of his mana, it was spat out for all it amounted to, and the vortex seemed to disappear. Well now, isn't that interesting? Harry grinned as he set the sword down on the work table in the smithy. He exited the smithy into the main room of his hidden workshop and pulled down the most advanced book on runecraft he currently had. If he was right, this book might be able to tell him what the vortex of the Sword of Gryffindor was. Flipping through the pages, Harry stopped near the back and looked at what he believed to be the most likely candidate for the sword's magical ability, or at least what made up the basis of it. The Consume Array. He smiled at the complex description of the array. That was all this book had on the array, a very complex description of what it did. There were no examples or even any concrete runic sequences that went into making said array, just an overview of what it did and how it functioned in relation to branches of magic like warding, enchanting, and ritual magic. And it looks like it'll be a good long while before I'm able to put something like this together. Harry mused as he read over the entry on the Consume Array. I might end up hurting myself or others if I messed up with this one. On June 30th, our leaving feast, Harry, Penny, Luna, and Padma clapped politely for Hufflepuff, this year's winner of the House Cup. The House of Yellow and Black were cheering at having won the cup for the first time in 9 years. Admittedly, this might have been due to the tensions that arose this year between Gryffindor and Slytherin over the Chamber of Secrets. Many a fight had broken out between the two houses when accusations had been thrown about between them. The ride on the express was fun. Luna sat with Harry and Penny for the ride and happily watched as the two performed wandless magic. The trio separated at King's Cross Station, and Harry and Penny were met by Sirius, Tonks, and Penny's father, Edward. Good to see you, Harry. Sirius smiled brightly as he pulled his godson into a hug. Penny keeping you out of trouble? He teased. Unlike some people, I don't get in trouble at school. Harry retorted, and Sirius chuckled while ruffling his hair. Watch her, Harrikins. Tonks practically smothered him with her hug. Tonks, Harry and I wanted you to guess how much Harry has developed his mana levels this year. Penny told the metamorph, after hugging her father tightly. Harry has been busy this year. Is that so, Harry? Tonks put her face very close to Harry's with a teasing grin. Well, I know you haven't eclipsed me yet. Not to brag much, but I got a reading of 6,122 this morning. Well then, how about you guess? Harry grinned challengingly. A free stinging hex to me if you're within 100 points of my level. If you're not, I get a free stinging hex on you. Oh, someone's confident, are they? Tonks grinned back at him. I accept your bet. Penny and Harry both forced themselves not to smirk at Tonks, walking right into their prank. It was a bet the metamorph wouldn't be able to win. She'd never expect the boost Harry had gotten from the basilisk and the rite of conquest. Whenever you're ready, Harry grinned, knowing it would rile Tonks up a little. You were only around 2,000 the last time you told me, Tonks began as she looked contemplative. Harrikins usually splits his time between wandless magic and enchanting, unlike me who's always getting stronger. She teased with a wink. So if it's been almost half a year, a little less, then I'm going to ballpark you around an even 3,000 since you're so confident. Penny, hand me the test frame, Harry requested with a smile. Here you are, Harry, Penny replied in a chipper tone. Oh, sorry, Tonks. Looks like you were a bit off. Harry grinned as he poured his mana into the test frame and got his reading. He turned it around and both Tonks and Sirius's eyes went wide at the number displayed. How the heck are you at 50172? Tonks exclaimed, and Penny and Harry burst into laughter. Stop laughing and explain, you prats. First my prize, Harry exclaimed as he hit Tonks in the shin with a stinging hex. Ow, darn it, Harry. Tonks censored herself as a family with small children walked by. Ah, victory. Such a lovely feeling. Harry teased her back. Penny was openly giggling at her older friend, while Edward and Sirius both looked amused at the antics between the three. Less gloating, more explaining. Tonks huffed at them, and the two told Tonks, Sirius, and Edward about Harry's rite of conquest and the ritual empowerment he'd received from eating the basilisk. Only you, Harry, I swear only you. Sirius chuckled as he patted his godson's shoulder. Edward congratulated him on conquering such a powerful magical beast. Tonks just grumbled about Penny and Harry setting her up. Penny hugged Harry tightly as they said their goodbyes and then left with her father. Tonks, in revenge, kissed Harry's cheeks in front of the remaining students on the platform before apparating away. This left a red-faced Harry looking at a lot of staring classmates. Let's go. Harry spoke as he turned away from the Hogwarts students and headed for the flue. I think you two tied today, Harry. Sirius offered his commentary on the ongoing prank war between his godson and Tonks. Though I believe that still puts Tonks ahead by a wide margin. He laughed as Harry started and then walked faster towards the flue. Shush you! Harry threw back over his shoulder. This, of course, only made Sirius laugh harder. The two quickly returned to Wood End Cottage in a flash of green fire. Current mana levels, Harry, 5,172, Tonks, 6,422, Penelope, 5,670, Fleur, 6,000 and plus. Chapter 20. Crafting Theories, Summer Trip. Harry hummed as he mused to himself about the properties of basilisk bone versus dragon bone. He'd tested their magical potential compared to each other and found they were both about the same. The basilisk bone, probably due to the creature's age, had more mana packed into it, but the rest of its properties were near identical to dragon bone. Because he'd conquered the basilisk, the mana in the bones would not fade for a very long time. This was a good thing because Harry had the whole skeleton to make use of. It would be a shame to lose the materials to time after all. He'd have to run a few more tests with powdered basilisk bone and compare the results to standard powdered dragon bone to be sure. But Harry was confident he could save money on supplies if he didn't have to buy any more powdered dragon bone for the foreseeable future. Other than that particular theory, Harry was already coming up with ideas for the rest of the basilisk. The eyes had been recovered and preserved into two separate, unbreakable crystal containers filled with a preservation draft. Harry had to give the renderers credit. The two unbreakable containers had also been spelled to be opaque enough to cancel out any lingering power the basilisk's eyes may have possessed. They were both currently sitting in his rune safe until Harry could find some way to make use of them. As for the basilisk's scales, hide, and fangs, Harry already had some rather obvious ideas for these materials. The horns on the back of the basilisk's head would also be used once Harry found a use for them. Decisions, decisions, Harry mumbled to himself as he looked through his notes on creaturecraft. He'd taken the time to translate all of the Japanese into English and copy it down into a journal devoted to creaturecraft. As he progressed and expanded his skills with this form of enchanting, Harry was planning to add his own thoughts, experiences, and ideas. Obviously, the scales and hide can be made into defensive items, cloaks, or leatherware for the hide, outright armor for the scales. Harry mused thoughtfully. If he could do this properly, he'd have more than enough material to get Nim, Penny, Sirius, and potentially even Nim's parents and Remus some basilisk leather armor. The scales are so strong and magically resistant that I might be able to make something along the lines of full-plate armor. Since I conquered the basilisk, I can even make artifacts from the materials. Basilisk scale mail sounds cool. The young artificer nodded to his own thoughts. The fangs, especially the two retractable ones, can be used to make weapons. Harry thought aloud as he looked over the notes on creaturecraft. Swords, knives, maybe the core of a focus of some type too? He considered as he then looked over to the side to see the basilisk's horns, neatly packed into a wooden box in the corner of his smithy at Wood End Cottage. If possible, maybe the horns could be used for cores too. Or at the very least, maybe they could be used for a spearhead. That seems simple enough. Do you think he knows he does that? Tonks whispered to Penny as the two of them stood in the doorway of the smithy. Probably not, but it's kind of cute. Penny smiled at the sight of Harry, thinking aloud to himself. Harrikins! Tonks called loudly, making Harry startle at the unexpected voice. Time to go! We're taking the port key to France soon. Harry spun to face Tonks and Penny, with his hand over his heart. Must you do that? Harry deadpanned, and Tonks smiled as she nodded. Every time, Tonks teased, while Penny gently swatted her shoulder. Rudeness aside, it is time to go, Harry. You got caught up in your work again. Penny explained. Is it that time already? Harry blinked before looking at the clock on the far wall of his smithy. Oh, I guess it is. It's a good thing I packed last night. Come on, Harry, time for a visit to your third wife. Tonks laughed, and Harry sputtered out denials. It's not like that, Nim, Harry retorted as he followed the two girls out of the smithy. Sure it's not. Tonks stuck her tongue out at him. Harry immediately insisted that they were just pen pals, and that they'd never even met. Tonks just shrugged, and Harry sighed at the metamorph. That'd be nice, Tonks, Penny smiled softly at the two. They'd technically asked Harry to ask Fleur to ask her parents to invite them along as well. The idea of letting Harry meet a Vila girl that was already writing to Harry about a topic they both enjoyed wasn't what concerned them. It was the thought of only Sirius being there with Harry. The Lord Black may have been dating Marley Reed for almost a full year now, but just because he was taken didn't mean he wouldn't encourage Harry to make a few Vila friends for the future. He may have gotten better after falling for Marley, but he was still Sirius Black, horn dog extraordinaire, self-proclaimed ladies' man of the Marauders. Both Penny and Tonks felt much better tagging along on this visit. Taylor, could you bring me my bag, please? Harry called out as they made their way to the port key departure point. This particular point was in the field off to the side of Wood End Cottage. International port keys has to be scheduled after all. Crossing border magically without informing the relevant ministries of magic was illegal after all. Here you are, young Master Harry. Taylor smiled brightly as she popped in with the said bag. Thank you, Taylor. Harry smiled at the house elf, making her beam at him before she popped away. Tonks and Penny stopped at the destination and picked up their own bags they'd left there when they went to get Harry. Good morning, all. Sirius smiled brightly as he approached with the port key, a length of rope in hand. He had his own small bag in his left hand and was all smiles. His good mood was in no small part to another date with Marley just a few days ago. It was the first date he came home very late from, in fact. Harry had already been asleep by the time Sirius had returned. The young artificer wasn't even going to ponder on the why, but he had his suspicions and didn't want them confirmed. Just about time. Penny looked at her watch. Right. Grab a hold, everyone. Sirius held out the rope to everyone. Harry, Tonks, and Penny grabbed onto the rope, and not even a minute later, they were whisked away. Harry felt like something had grabbed him behind his stomach, and then a sensation of spinning for several moments. When the spinning stopped, Harry stumbled and fell onto the grass they'd reappeared on. Someone stop the world! Harry grumbled as he waited for the disorientation to pass. I hate port keys. Tonks grumbled from where she'd ended up sprawled across the grass. That was less than pleasant. Penny agreed, though the blonde at least landed on her feet. You get better with experience. Sirius laughed at the three as he helped Tonks and Harry off the ground. Monsieur Potter, Monsieur Black, Madame Tonks, Madame Clearwater, welcome to Chateau Delacour. A house elf greeted them. The little elf was wearing what looked to be a modified silk curtain and was obviously female. May Collie be taking your bags for you? That would be lovely, thank you, Collie. Sirius replied with a smile to the elf. With a snap, all of their bags disappeared, and a soft pop saw Collie vanishing as well. Harry! A delightfully warm voice called out. And the group turned to the chateau and saw a girl close to Penny's age, a year younger according to her letters to Harry, approaching them. With the teen, obviously Fleur, was a woman who looked like an older sister, a slightly plump man with a styled mustache and goatee, and a small girl that couldn't have been older than 7. Fleur, it is good to finally meet in person. Harry smiled at his pen pal. The picture she'd sent him in one of her earlier letters didn't do her justice. Seeing her face to face was far better. Fleur smiled at him and kissed both of his cheeks in greeting. Harry tried and failed to keep his cheeks from heating up at the platinum blonde's greeting. He was pretty sure he heard Sirius and Tonks snickering in the background too. "Please, I'd like you to meet my papa and mama and my little sister." Fleur smiled happily at him. From there, pleasantries and greetings were exchanged. Fleur's father, Marius Delacour, was a pleasant man. He and Sirius quickly got along. Her mother, Apolline Delacour, was the woman that he'd thought might have been an older sister. She was smiling and seemed pleased to meet him and the others. Lastly, the young girl was Gabrielle, who happily babbled in rapid-fire French. Harry was able to understand a bit of the little girl's talking, but quickly lost track and was lost. Come in, we've a lovely brunch set up." Marius welcomed them into the chateau, and the 4 British magicals followed along. The group was quickly led to a lovely dining room, and the spread of food available was impressive to say the least. Sirius had had some of the food before, and was comfortable enough to pick out a few favorites. Harry, Penny, and Tonks took what looked good and whatever the Delacours recommended. Harry found he liked the pastry called pain au chocolat. Though that might be because it was a soft bread with chocolate inside, I was very impressed to hear that you'd earned the title of Artificer so young, Monsieur Potter. Marius smiled at Harry. I was surprised too, Harry admitted with a sheepish grin. You can all call me Harry if you prefer as well. You were surprised, Harry? Apolline questioned the Artificer. Were you not trying to become an artificer? I was. I just didn't expect to stumble into the title. Harry smiled as he heard Tonks snickering again. Stumble into? Fleur questioned with a grin on her face. That sounds like a story. Oh, I can sum it up pretty easily. Tonks smiled brightly. Harry was a bit of a dum-dum and didn't realize his completed project qualified as an artifact. Tonks. Harry sighed with an eye roll. It wasn't until my mother suggested he get it checked out that he realized what he might have created. Tonks was stifling giggles at this point. Sirius and Penny were both smiling as well, laughter clear in their eyes. I was just trying to finish my safe. Harry defended himself. I wasn't exactly trying to create an artifact. By now, everyone was chuckling lightly at the accidental nature of Harry's first artifact. A great many advancements are made by mistake or in the pursuit of other goals, Harry. You simply benefited from such a scenario. Marius chuckled, and Harry had to admit, the Frenchman was correct. He'd learned about accidental inventions during his non-magical education. From there, talk turned to schooling, then jobs, plans for the future, and so on. Fleur wanted to be a magical scholar, researching different branches of magic and trying to gain a deeper understanding of the primordial force that was magic. Penny and Fleur clicked quickly after that, when Penny mentioned her own interest in spellcraft. I'm completely outnumbered by nerds, Tonks playfully jibed at the other 3. Maybe nerds are your type, then Tonksy. Sirius teased the metamorph as he nonchalantly buttered a croissant. Tonks jabbed her finger at him, and a stinging hex was sent his way. Sirius, having seen this coming, already had his wand in hand and canceled the hex with a finite. Oh my, you can perform wandless magic, Auror Tonks? Apolline blinked in surprise at the use of non-verbal, wandless casting. Yeah, but it's not my secret to share. So if you were wanting to learn, I'm afraid I can't help you. Tonks rubbed the back of her head. She was so used to her circle of friends and family knowing about her wandless capabilities that she'd gotten used to using her magic without a second thought. None, I was merely surprised. Apolline waved off. It is not often that you see a witch or wizard with the skill to perform much of any magic without a wand. I understand, Tonks nodded. In Europe and North America, wands were standard. Only in a few places in the world were different forms of casting taught. Tonks wasn't one to go out of her way to look up this information. But Penny had looked into it and found that both the most prominent magical schools in Africa, Ouagadougou, and in Japan, Mahutakoro, taught other forms of casting. Apparently, wandless magic wasn't so much a mystery to other parts of the world, merely something that took many years of study to perform with any skill. Tonks would take Harry's method over whatever the other schools were offering, though. It hadn't taken her or Penny years of study and practice, merely coming to a better understanding of their own magic and how to handle it. After the lovely brunch, the adults happily chatted and traded stories, while the younger members went off to have a tour of the chateau and grounds with Fleur. The Vila girl had happily shown her pen pal and the new friends she'd made in Penny and Tonks around her home. Gabby, as the 7-year-old had asked to be called, followed along with them and asked her own curious questions in French. After the tour, the group was sitting in the large gardens of the chateau and getting to know each other better. Fleur was ecstatic to find out that all 3 of her new friends were Occlumans. None of them felt anything from her natural Vila allure, and Fleur was happy to have friends that liked her for her. Instead of drooling on themselves or getting jealous or envious, to little Gabby's amusement, Tonks had demonstrated her metamorph magus abilities, changing her face, hair, eyes, all to the little Vila girl's requests. You've created your own spell already? Fleur asked, impressed to Penny. It's based off a couple of other charms, but yes. Penny nodded with a smile. It can make a bit of a mess, though. Strangely, it's not a form of fire magic. Harry shrugged with a teasing grin. I'm pretty convinced that she's a pyromancer that just likes to dabble in other spells occasionally. Oh, hush you. Penny playfully huffed as she poked him with a small ball of mana. Sort of like a stinging hex, but without the painful effect. A fire magic, you say? Fleur tilted her head and raised her hand. With a small snap, a ball of flame appeared above her palm, which she held out to them. I've a bit of an affinity for that branch of magic. The platinum blonde grinned. Ooh, are we about to have a magic off? Tonks questioned, looking almost giddy. You sound like you want to show off. Harry raised an eyebrow. What? Me? No. Tonks held up her hands as if to ward off his accusation. No one there believed her, though. I would not mind a bit of a friendly duel. Fleur spoke up. No one at Beauxbaton is much of a challenge. They either just stare at me until I defeat them, or they attack to try and prove something to either me or themselves. Neither is very good for practice, as you can imagine. The first isn't a challenge, and the other throws all of their magic, or mana, behind their first few spells and quickly tires themselves out. Well, I guess, but I'm not the greatest duelist or anything. Penny shrugged. Says the girl who threw how many fireballs at me during the dueling club? Harry teased, and Penny flicked another mana ball at him. Harry swatted the ball away with his hand and stood up. I do believe that was a challenge. Maybe it was, Penny sniffed in a faux pompous manner. All right, free for all. Tonks cheered with a laugh as she picked up Gabby, making the 7-year-old giggle happily, and quickly took the young girl further away to a safe distance that she could watch from. The metamorph reached out with her man and transfigured a low stone wall from the dirt. She placed Gabby behind the wall and told her, in the limited French she had, to not come out from behind it until they were done. Gabby had happily nodded along to the request, eager to see more magic. I apologize, but fire is all I can conjure wandlessly, so I'll be using my wand. Fleur twirled the focus between her fingers before gripping it firmly. That's more than fine, Fleur. Harry smiled at his blue-eyed friend. I'm sure Penny will be tossing around enough fire for all of us. Just keep digging that hole deeper, Harry. Just keep digging. Penny nodded at him with a grin that promised retribution. Ready? Tonks began. Set! Harry continued. Go! Fleur finished and raised a strong protego with her wand. Catch! Tonks laughed as she yanked up some stones from the ground and transfigured them into rubber balls. The balls were blasted towards the other three at speed. Nope! Harry raised his own protego, followed by Penny, and the rubber balls all bounced off the shield charms. I've already got all three of you on the back foot. Tonks chuckled before using the spell Harry had shown her, Similitudo, to make an illusionary mirror image of herself. The two Tonks split up to confuse their opponents. So you think, Penny retorted as she moved to her left and conjured fireballs that she sent towards both Tonks. One raised and moved her arms, snuffing out the fireballs heading her way. The other moved her arm, and the fireballs passed through her, making the illusion vanish. Do not forget about me. Fleur smiled as a barrage of snowballs pelted towards the other three. Tonks used levitation to alter the course of any snowball headed her way. The aura didn't even have to move to avoid the barrage. Penny transfigured the dirt into a thin wall in front of her and shielded behind it. Harry used the Immobilis charm to stop any snowball that got to close. When the barrage ended, he had almost a dozen snowballs frozen in midair. You can have these back. Harry grinned as he turned the snowballs into water and launched them like water balloons in the girls' directions. Ha ha ha, Tonks mocked as she exerted her will on the conjured water and made it disappear. Penny simply willed her dirt shield to move, and she easily blocked the water balls. Fleur used an evaporation charm, and the water balls were gone before they reached her. Penny crumbled her dirt shield into sand, and then whipped her hand into the air. Sand veils all, the blonde intoned, and a strong wind whipped up and caught the particles. In a matter of seconds, their battlefield was covered by the mini sandstorm. Well, there goes my hair, Tonks complained loudly. Down, Harry stated with an echo of power in his voice. All of the sand whipping through the air was suddenly forced to the ground and held there by Harry's will. You didn't think I'd figure out a counter for that spell of yours? I'm hurt, Penny. Ropes shot across the battlefield and moved as if they were alive. The source was Fleur's wand as she conjured more and more to try and bind all three of them. Tonks, Harry, and Penny all waved their hands, unleashing cutting charms against the writhing ropes. Fleur watched as her constructs disappeared after being sliced to pieces. Without missing a beat, the platinum blonde flicked her wand and then made multiple swirling motions with it. The ground warped as it was transfigured and a large bear made of dirt and rock formed. It let out a soundless roar before charging the three of them. Beasts, huh? Tonks questioned before raising her arms and framing the charging golem with her hands. Cube! The golem bear slammed into a nearly transparent wall. Bouncing backwards from the sudden stop made it collide with a wall behind it. Below it, above it, and on all four sides were strong walls of magic, like inverted shield charms, but stronger. Capture complete, the bubbly metamorph laughed. Am I the only one that doesn't have a named spell of his own? Harry lamented loudly, before moving his arms in large circles a few times. Water formed into two large spheres, and then merged into a single large ball of water. With a chop from his hand, a thin, fast-moving line of water left the ball and sliced clean through the cube and the bear golem instantly. How'd you do that? Tonks demanded with an almost pout on her face. I worked hard on that spell. Oh, Harry, you know we can just... Why can't I finite your conjured water? Penny questioned as she failed to make the water vanish. This isn't conjuration. I simply gathered this water together from the air. Harry stuck his tongue out at the prefect with a smug grin. Cool off time! Harry made the large ball of water blast forward like a rain shower. All three girls raised Protego to keep from getting soaked by the downpour. As soon as the water stopped, Fleur made her move. Flames leapt from her left hand and formed into a bird-like shape. The Firebird flew into the air above the battlefield and flapped its wings to unleash a constant stream of small fireballs. Penny dealt with the barrage with her own wall of fire. The small fireballs only merged with her flames. The blonde-eyed Fleur, seeing the Velatine focused solely on her construct and took action. A stomp on the ground sent a spell through the dirt. When said spell reached Fleur's position, the dirt under her feet heaved upwards about a dozen centimeters. This sudden disruption of her footing broke her concentration, and the Firebird dissipated. Penny gathered her wall of fire into a ball for a moment, and then sent a wave of flames across the battlefield at Tonks and Harry. Both of them had huddled under their own Protego to defend against the fireballs. Cheap! Tonks squawked as she clapped her hands together with a look of intense concentration on her face. The air in front of her began to swirl and then spin rapidly. The flames were sucked up and blown out like a candle in mere seconds. Harry merely yanked the water from the wet ground and doused the wave of fire heading for him. Sagita Flamma! Fleur conjured fire from her left hand and then shaped it into arrows with her wand. That didn't look safe to Harry. So much fire today. Tonks laughed as she conjured up a large amount of water and then had it swirl into a point like a massive drill. That was going a bit too far. You're not exactly giving any ground yourself, Penny yelled to her older friend, as a bright ball of mana was held between her hands. That also didn't look good. Enough! Harry roared out, just before the girls could launch their spells. He conjured lightning for the first time in a while. Channeling the Fulman curse down his arm and to his index and middle fingertips, he launched a bolt of electricity into the air. The sharp buzzing sound followed by the crack of superheated air snapped the girls out of the free-for-all and made them look at Harry. I think we were all a little caught up. He huffed, starting to realize how much mana he had expended during their little duel. I'm so sorry. Fleur apologized as she dismissed her spell. I got too competitive. No, I'm the adult here. I should have calmed us down earlier. Tonks shook her head and dispersed her conjured water. I think we all got a bit carried away, Penny admitted as the ball of mana in her hands shrank and then faded away. Sorry about that. All four of them apologized at the same time. When they all realized they said the same thing in unison, Tonks and Harry cracked up. Their laughter triggered Penny and Fleur, making the platinum-haired girl and the blonde both descend into giggles. C'était incroyable. Gabby came rushing toward the group. Her beaming smile could have lit up the night. Votre magie était si chouette. Peux-tu m'apprendre? Je veux faire ça! Fleur quickly gathered her little sister up into a hug and picked the younger girl up. Gabby giggled and hugged her older sister happily. Peut-être quand tu seras plus âgée. Fleur smiled at her little sister. I only understood about half that, Harry whispered to Penny and Tonks. More than me, I only understood the first sentence. Tonks admitted with a shrug. She said that was amazing. Our magic was so neat. She wants to know if we can teach her. And finally, she wants to do what we did, is what she said. Penny clarified since she was fluent in French. What did Fleur say? Harry asked, since he hadn't caught what his friend had said to Gabby. Maybe when you're older. Penny translated for him with a soft smile at the sisters' interaction. At the chateau, for a moment I thought we'd have to intervene. Marius exhaled in relief, seeing how much his daughter and her new friends were getting into their duel. I figured one of them would realize pretty quick when it started going too far. Sirius smiled, though he already had his wand out. They're very impressive, Appling breathed out in amazement. Fleur is so far ahead of her schoolmates in magic already. But those three kept up with her so easily. Harry, Penny, and Tonks are all quite the gifted spellcasters. Sirius chuckled as he put his wand back in its holster. They're exactly the kind of friends our little flower needs. Marius smiled. Ones that are on the same level as her, and won't be jealous or resentful of her talent. I'm so pleased that she's found 3 such people. The French father looked truly happy for his eldest child. Yes, we should have visits from time to time, Apolline agreed. We should exchange flu addresses so the children can talk or visit on breaks and such. I don't think that will be a problem. Sirius smiled brightly as the adults watched the youngsters play around on their way back to the shadow. Current mana levels: Harry, 5,196, Tonks, 6,478, Penelope, 5,702, Fleur, 6,000 plus. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I will continue with 1 part a day for this story as well.